And good afternoon, colleagues and friends of Urban Can and Future Earth Taipei. I am Shuli Huang. On behalf of Urban Working Group of Future Earth Taipei, I would like to welcome all of you and thank you for participating in this online forum of the Societal Foundation for Coping Climate Change and Low Carbon Transformation. This forum is organized by Urban Working Group of Future Earth Taipei and co-organized by Urban Can of Future Earth. Future Earth Taipei is located in the Academia Sinica Taipei and operated by the Center for Sustainability Science to promote multidisciplinary and solution-oriented sustainability research. And corresponding to the different knowledge action network of Future Earth, 11 working groups have been established by Future Earth Taipei to facilitate linkage with international networks. An Urban Working Group is one of the 11 working groups, and I'm serving the coordinator of the group, and Professor Michael Xiao is the advisor to this group. And I'm very thankful for Professor Xuemei Bai's invitation to join the steering committee of Urban Can. And because of this, I participated in Urban Can's steering committee meeting in November 2019 in Australia. The steering committee meeting came up with 5 main themes of research priorities. So in the beginning of this year, January 2021, Urban Working Group of Future Earth Taipei held a workshop with more than 30 researchers to discuss the past efforts of Taiwan urban sustainability research. And we also discussed the future research priorities corresponding to the 5 themes of the research priority by Urban Can. And one of the conclusions of the workshop is to organize a forum and invite Urban Can to co-organize the activity for sharing previous knowledge and experience of urban sustainability. So here we are today in this forum. The 2 panels arranged in this forum are actually 2 of the 2 research priorities by Urban Can. So in the opening session of this conference, the co-chair of Urban Can, Professor Xuemei Bai, and the advisor of Urban Working Group, Future Earth Taipei, Professor Michael Xiao, will deliver the welcome address. First of all, we would like to invite Professor Bai, and she's the co-chair of Urban Can and currently distinguished professor of urban environment and human ecology at Bennett School of Environment and Society at Australian National University. And Professor Bai is also a fellow of social science in Australia since 2017, and she received Volvo Environment Prize in 2018. And earlier this year, she just received the 2021 Global Economy Prize. So I would like to welcome Professor Bai delivering the welcome address. Professor Bai, thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Huang. It's great to see you again and your colleagues. So first of all, I would really like to start by thanking our colleagues at Future Earth Taipei Urban Working Group, especially Professor Huang and Professor Michael Xiao, and also Ying Xuan for really initiating and organizing this forum. So I think this is a great initiative, and we're very happy to be co-organizing this event. And I would also like to acknowledge and celebrate the first Australians on whose land I'm joining from today, and pay my respect to the elders of past, present, and emergent. So I probably would like to share my slides so that I can briefly introduce what is Urban Can that we've been talking about. So let me share my slide. Can you see it now?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yes, pretty clear.
Okay, so I would like to spend the next couple of minutes to briefly introduce what is Urban Can, Urban Knowledge Action Network under Future Earth. So for those of you who actually don't know, haven't heard of Future Earth before, It's one of the global research initiative. It's one of the biggest network of researchers who are working on global change science and policy. And the Future Earth had some, precursor international programs, for example, like WCRP, which is still there, I believe, and IGBP and IHDP and Diversitas. So some of you might have heard one or more of those names. And then Future Earth is a sort of evolution from all those previous international programs. So it's really a global initiative focused on advancing sustainability science, and its vision is to generate a sustainable and equitable world for all, and where societal decisions are informed by openly accessible and shared sort of knowledge. And Future's mission is to advance research in support of transformations to global sustainability. So under this banner of Future Earth, there are two kind of action sort of arms. One is called Global Research Project, and the other is called the Knowledge Action Networks. So you can see under this Global Research Projects, there are various projects, for example, carbon emission, dealing with carbon emission, atmospheric science and pollution, things like that, land use or biodiversity, marine water or health, governance, various elements. And under this Knowledge Action Network arm, we have, water, energy, and food nexus, ocean, health, again, finance, economics, and of course, urban CAN. So this urban CAN actually has the characteristics of both Global Research Project and Knowledge Action Network, because we don't really have a urban focused global research project, and urban is such an important topic in global sustainability. So our CAN, although we are sitting under this Knowledge Action Network, we are also conducting research and performing similar functions as GRP. So again, the Urban CAN, Urban Knowledge Action Network is a global network of researchers and other innovators in policy, business, civil society, and beyond. So we are really trying to work to solve the most pressing challenges facing cities worldwide today. And we would like to build knowledge and tools to accelerate real-world transition and transformations toward cities that are sustainable and livable. So here is the member of steering committee of Urban CAN. We started with myself and Professor Taiwan McPherson at New School in New York as the co-chair, and Taiwan stepped down as of last year due to his enhanced sort of increased workload and everything because of the COVID-19. So we now have a new co-chair who is Kensuke Fukushi from Tokyo University. And as you can see, this scientific steering committee is, we tried our best to balance it in terms of gender, in terms of geographical representativeness and everything. And you can see Professor Huang is one of our SC member here. And within this Urban CAN, we also have another layer of governance body, which is called Advisory Group of Urban CAN. So this group is sitting just outside of this core science committee and provide knowledge and provide information, and whenever that it is needed, we would like to consult them in terms of some of the major decisions, for example, like choosing the science steering committee and things like that. So again, here is the three sort of key areas that Urban CAN would like to work in. The first one is building a community of practice and mobilize capacity for sustainable urban futures. So we'd really like to build a community of practice that include researchers and practitioners and policymakers in this urban space. And the second key area is really trying to facilitate, co-design and synthesize and amplify research to support the implementation of global sustainability initiatives at the city level. And the third is, which is very important, especially for the CANs within Future Earth, is really try to turn the knowledge into action by building networks, democratizing the data, and bringing unprecedented voices, underrepresented voices into this policy and planning. I mean, this is a really lofty sort of goal, but we just try as much as we could to speak to these three key areas. And Urban Can was launched in 2016 during the UN Habitat 3 meeting in Quito, Ecuador. And ever since, actually, it's not a very long time, but we could have conducted various activities. And of course, many of these activities could have been advanced even further. But, like everything else in the world, during the last 2 years, because of the COVID-19, many of our work was sort of halted. And we are looking to picking it up and then, rebuild this momentum. So here are some of the couple of major publications from Urban Can. For example, we have published a book titled Urban Planet in 2018. This book has involved more than 100 urban researchers and urban practitioners worldwide, and provided a state-of-the-art knowledge in terms of, science and policy in sustainable, towards a sustainable urban systems. And we've been very actively involved in various different international conferences. In the past, we provided input to the urban UN Habitat, the new urban agenda, through providing our input. And also we held several sessions at the Habitat 3 in Quito. And also I think here is the Innovate for Cities conference, which was in October this year. And this is a sequel of the first ever IPCC focused conference on cities and climate change, which is held in Edmonton in 2018. And Urban Can had played a key role both in that one and then this sequel conferences. And there are several other core projects, for example, like the Natura, which is a research network based in, I think it's in USA and Latin America, looking at urban adaptation mainly, and biodiversity as well. And also we're also part of some main international initiatives like IPBES or IPCC. Many of our members are IPCC lead or corresponding lead authors. And we've also been contributing to IPBES global assessment process. And here in this, I think here you can see this IPBES IPCC output. This is the first ever workshop that was co-organized by IPCC and IPBES, which is held, I think, sometime last year. And then the report was published a couple of months ago called Scientific Outcome on Biodiversity and Climate Change. And this is for the first time really trying to build a conscious sort of linkage between IPCC and IPBES, two of the most important intergovernmental panels in global environmental change. And this is another one of the examples of some of the high-level publications that Urban Can has led. This is coming from the first ever conference that I just mentioned of IPCC on cities and climate change. And we played a core role in terms of coming up with these research priorities for cities and climate change, which was published in Nature in 2018. So looking forward, now here's the photo of Professor Ken Fukushi as well. So some of the key next steps would be really try to broaden the global community and partnership with researchers and other innovators within the Future Earth membership and beyond. And you can do that actually through the portal. I will give you the link below. And we would also like to publish the strategic priorities that Professor Huang mentioned that we have identified in our SC meeting 2 years ago. And again, this process was delayed a bit, but we're trying to pick it up and then aiming at getting this published within probably mid next year. And then we would also like to focus on developing some of the funding strategies and aligning global, regional, and local research agendas to respond to policy agendas. And I think an initiative like this, collaborating with some national futures committee and their working groups, would be one of the great, some of the best ways of doing these things. So I'm really, really glad that I could be part of this, initiative forum today. So thank you very much, and please join our network if you haven't done so. You can join it through dcmembers.futureearth.org. And here are some of the contact informations, urban@futureearth.org. So thank you. I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you, Professor Bai, for your welcome address. And next, we would like to invite Professor Michael Shao to deliver the welcome address on behalf of Urban Working Group of Future Earth Taipei. Professor Michael Shao was the chair of Taiwan IHDP and of the Center for Southeast Asian Studies at National Chengchi University. And right now, he is also an adjunct research fellow of the Institute of Sociology at Academia Sinica. So please, Professor Michael Shao.
Thank you. It's my honor to be at the opening session for this important seminar. First of all, I would like to join Professor Wang to thank Professor Bai and her colleagues to co-organize this seminar. I would like to share with you for the next few minutes about how and what social scientists in Taiwan has been working on environment-related issues that include environmental studies, sustainable development, and local sustainability, climate change, risk society. And that have actually a group of social scientists, and include myself, has been working on it since the 1990s, and even before the IHDP was established. And after the IHDP was established in 1996, the Taipei office also opened. I serve as a coordinator for the IHDP Taipei. And then after, with the assistance of IHDP and other and Academic Sinica's financial support, we increase more publications on the research, empirical research on the topic I just listed. So I think this it has been a long way, since 1990s, and now the IHDP disappeared, and now 2013 we have the Future Earth, and then now we have last year, 2020, the Taipei's Urban Con was established, and we invited Professor Huang to serve as the chair, and I have the honor to assist him. So that's the introduction of that means what? Social scientists in Taiwan has been a part of a joint force in Taiwan's environmental, climate change, risk society research efforts. So I would like to share with you, just glance over things that Professor Bai also mentioned about some of the publications in the Urban Con headquarters. I think in 1993, we published this book called Taiwan 2000. And that is a first inventory of Taiwan's environmental study to see in 1990s that we started a project in the late 1980s, and then to project what will happen in 2000. That was long before. And then with the several scenarios, one scenario, of course, we all know, do nothing, business as usual. And then the other one, proactive, that means anticipatory approach. So this is the book is the product of that. That's in Chinese. And then with assistance of the Academic Sinica and National Science Council's budget, we continue at the 2000. We continue another book called Taiwan 2011. That means ours 100 years. So we did a sequel to this 2000 project. And then after that, and in the turn to the 2000 and the decade of 2000, then we look into the sustainable development, to look into, we take the sustainable development as an objective rather than a open prediction. We set up a goal. There's a book called Green Blueprint, Taiwan's Local Sustainable Development. That's published in 2005. And then later, then we take the Taiwan's case studies to look at 9 counties and cities as a case study to see what should we do to deepen the local sustainable development, and so as the Taipei City, New Taipei City, Tainan, and Kaohsiung can do to really fulfill the requirement of the local sustainability. This book was published in 2008. And later, then we've realized that if we want to study the sustainable development, local sustainability, we really need to look into the local environmental history. So we brought in the concept of environmental history way back during about 60, 80 years, and to look at how industrialization, urbanization affects the environmental consequences and the pollutions and the change of the landscape and so on and so forth. Then this book is a 9 county and cities case study, different case studies, to look at the lessons, what we learn from the lessons from the 9 cities and counties from the environmental history. This is a lengthy book that was published in, I think, 2015. And then 2017, then we take urban seriously, and with the help with Professor Huang and Professor Zhou, then we published with a 3 years project. We published this one, probably colleagues, you might be more interested, called Urban Climate Change Issues and Governance in Taiwan. So this was the first book to take urban climate change, how to deal with the climate change in the urban settings. And we also have a case study and a general overview. So it was 2017. And the last one, just recently published, 2 years ago, we published one. We take again, once you have done so many environmental inventory, local sustainable sustainable development, and also on the environmental history, and also the urban responses to climate change. So then we say, what happened to Taiwan's society future? Then we brought in risk society concept, and we examined several risks Taiwan facing in terms of Taiwan's on land depletion, on the overspread of industrialization, and also we take the aborigines, the indigenous peoples' residential risk, and we look in and also we take nuclear waste issue as a very potential important risk. And then this book was most recently published 2019. So those are the which I am familiar with, which I'm involved. Of course, these are the books. I cannot rule out the other books published by many other teams and research fellows, research scholars, and of course, journal articles, which I did not mention about. Now, what was the features of those 7 books, and also what I'm familiar with my research team has been working on? I think the first one is all the books I described are very much a social science analytical perspective. I think this to show that the environmental study, climate change study cannot be complete without the participation of a social science participation. That's number one. And second is all the books which I'm involved and my colleague involved are focused on Taiwan. So it's a Taiwan case studies. And again, we publish in Mandarin. So it's a very much an indigenized approach. And so we are ready to make Taiwan case as a compatible to other international perspective. So we can do the international competitive analysis in the near future. Number three, all the themes and topics of those books published, I'm familiar with, actually do have really clearly reflect of the current global concerns on environment, climate change, risk societies. So I think Taiwan is in line, the research has been in line with the global concern. So I think this is I wanted to say. And then lastly, I hope that with the leadership of Professor Huang, our UrbanCon Taipei can be more active to engage in and to participate, to organize more activities in both within Taiwan and also with Professor Bai's assistance, with UrbanCon's help, and we can do the regional seminars, and so that we can really compare, Taiwan within the framework of regional. And that's, for example, Taiwan and Southeast Asia, Taiwan and Northeast Asia, and even in the Pacific or Asia Pacific perspective. So with this note, thanks again, and I look forward to our presentations in this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Okay, and thank you, Professor Xiao, for your briefing on the previous study of sustainability study in Taiwan. And following the two welcome address, and before we proceed to the first panel, the conference secretary would like to take a group photo. So Ying-Xuan, please tell us what to do. Should we just smile or?
Hi, participants, everyone. Please turn on your camera, and we would like to take a group photo. And I would like to invite you to now raise your hands and put your hands as a shape like this. It's representing you, or if you can do this. It's not.
What is that? The Earth?
Yeah, representing urban.
Oh, urban.
Oh, it's not easy. Okay.
Well, just like this.
Yeah.
Like a lotus.
So, okay, we would like to take the screenshot. 1, 2, 3. Okay, shall we have one more? We can have
Okay.
this. 1, 2, 3. Okay, one more, okay? 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. So for the first panel, we would like to invite Professor Su-Chin Zhou to chair the session of Accelerate Transition Pathway. Professor Zhou, I'll pass the chairmanship to you.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Su-Chin Zhou from the Department of Geography, National Taiwan University. It's a great honor to invite two speakers to join this session on the theme of Accelerate Transition Pathways, which is the first task force of the research priority for UrbanCan Science Plan. And our first speaker, Professor Bai, is a key person working on this science plan. And in our opening session, Professor Huang have already introduced into a great detail for Professor Bai, so I won't repeat it again. But for those research interests is in the field of urban sustainability science and policy, you should know her name quite well. Her leading role in this field needs no more words for me to introduce her. And in order to save time, let's give our warm welcome with big applause to Professor Bai first, and then I will introduce another speaker later. Okay, please.
Thank you so much, Professor Joe, for your very kind introduction. So can you see my slide now?
Yes, yes.
Professor
Okay.
Bai, would you please enlarge the screen by, make it
Oh,
full? Thank you. Hey, I think that you can, can you press the play
Put it in
mode?
the full screen mode. Full screen.
yeah, let me see.
I think it's full. Do you have the, playing?
Yeah, let
wheel?
me do the
There
slideshow.
is a button left to the bar.
How is this?
Oh yes, yes, yes.
Yes,
It
better.
works.
Thank
Good.
you.
Okay, thank you. I've never used this particular software before, so yeah. So great, thank you again, Professor Joe, and I really appreciate this opportunity to share some of our thought and work in accelerating transition. So what I would like to do is, after briefly introducing the accelerating transition theme within the urban can, I would like to focus on a couple of elements of accelerating transition from our own work and just give you a couple of examples what we actually mean by upscaling the urban innovation, and then through that to achieve the sustainability overall. So as Professor Huang has mentioned, we have developed this urban can research priorities. There are 5 of them. So the first one is accelerate urban sustainability transformation, transition and transformation. The second one is ensure equity and inclusivity. The third one is amplify innovation from low to lower middle income countries. And then the fourth one is negotiate complexity and systemic risks. And fifth one is navigate environmental change. So today my charge is really talk about the accelerate urban sustainability transformation. So within this accelerate urban sustainability transition and transformation, I'll come to the point to the need of this transition and transformation very briefly a bit later on. But I would really like to highlight some of the key questions that we identified within this theme. So, for example, the first question is, what kind of political, institutional, social, and economic knowledge and practices can hinder or facilitate the accelerated transition? And how can we leverage this kind of understanding for rapid transition towards sustainable, resilient, livable, and inclusive urban future? And we know that cross-sector collaboration is an important enabler of urban mitigation and adaptation action. So what kind of actions are being taken, particularly those that may be identified as mixes of high-impact solutions? And what are the opportunities for diffusing and diversifying these actions for more context-specific solutions? And what is the role of integration in urban systems to accelerate possible solutions in urban transitions? And how can urban science respond in a timely way to observe, record, assess, evaluate, build, and share transferable knowledge from innovative practices and experiments? So my following examples will really be focusing on this particular item. And there are more questions. For example, what are the new roles and responsibilities of different actors? That includes from all the way from national, international, all the way to the private sector, city government, researchers, and the public in this transition process. And how can we mobilize these stakeholders at different scales to orchestrated actions for an orchestrated action towards more desirable urban futures? And a couple of more questions. For example, what are the disruptive elements, including new concepts, tools, mechanisms, leaders, and socio-economic, cultural, technological, institutional innovations and tipping points that can bring about accelerated transition towards sustainability? And also equally, what are the well-known solutions? We are not only talking about the destructive elements, but also there are lots of well-known solutions out there, but that are not really broadly used yet. So what are some of these well-known solutions and elements of solutions that we are not, using effectively, and how can we make it more, broadly adopted and upscaled? And how can we create and share desirable future visions and goals? Because in order to transform towards something, you need to have a very clear goals. Where are we transforming towards? And then it is really important that we construct these visions and goals involving the society, the urban residents and decision makers, practitioners, and every stakeholders that are there. And how can we leverage our knowledge to enable quantum advances rather than just adding a little bit towards to on top of what we are having already now? And how can we sustain the momentum for innovative and sustainable practices? For example, how can we build positive inertia in a varying and changing socioeconomic, institutional, and political cycles and contexts? I'll give an example of this as well later on. And also, it is very important that we adopt the systems change perspective as means of navigating this transformation, including the complexity and interdependency. And how can we, actually do that? What kind of innovative economic systems in order to accelerate the sustainable transformations? And that includes, for example, different forms of carbon tax or carbon credit or credit transfer, all sorts of innovative sort of mechanisms. And what are the models of governance, and how can the views from these diverse stakeholders be better embedded in the decision making? So because we were talking about co-design and co-production, so it is very important for us to explore what are some of the ways that we can actually have an enhanced engagement from these stakeholders in order to make the co-design and co-production possible. So I would like to give you a bit of a background, a really broad sort of background, why this sort of transformation, accelerated transformation, is needed. So there was a paper published in 2020 talking about the global human-made mass exceeded all living mass biomass. So when you think about it, this is really quite astonishing, because what we're talking about is that the human-made materials like metals, asphalt, bricks, or plastics, concrete, all these sort of things, when we add them up, their dry weight actually exceed all the animals or all the trees, shrubs, every living things in the world. Actually, we have already surpassed in terms of dry mass. And you might be saying, dry mass is not fair because living things, it has very high percentage of water. But then even if we turn this into a wet mass, it just delay the year of 2020 cross point about 10 years, I think. So by about 35-ish, I forgot the exact number, this cross point will still occur. So you can see this is an accelerating sort of trend, following an accelerating trend. And this is another figure from the same paper that are contrasting the key components of this global biomass and anthropogenic mass in the year 2020. So we can see in terms of living biomass, the animals, the total weight of the animals is 4 gigaton on the Earth. And then whereas the plastic we have produced is 8 gigaton in total. And entire trees and shrubs, they weigh about 900 gigaton. But if you look at the buildings and infrastructure, they weigh over that, more than that, about 1,100 gigatons. And I don't know what you think when you see these sort of figures. For me, this instantly actually suggests that cities are probably the main culprit in this picture, because most of the buildings and most of the infrastructure are really focused, concentrated in urban space. And this is why we really need to have this accelerated transformation so that we can address this accelerating trend of environmental impact. And here's another example of accelerating or the magnitude of environmental impact of cities. So we already know that cities are using about 74% of all final energy use in the world, and probably emit somewhere between 70 to 75% of all CO2 from final energy use. And if you look into the future, we know that there will be about 2 billion more people that will be added to cities in the world by 2050. And these people will all need a place to live and basic service provided. So just building and upgrading this urban infrastructure in developing cities, where most of these 2 billion new urban residents will be added to, will release up to 226 gigatons CO2 by 2050. So if you break this down, you can see just building infrastructure to upgrade the developing cities would produce 109 gigatons of CO2. And then building infrastructure to accommodate the 2 billion more people will be emitting another 117 gigatons of CO2. And if you add these two up and then compare this with what happened in the developed, when we build the developed world cities and infrastructure, it is more than 4 times of embodied energy in this infrastructure than that is already existing in developed world. And of course, carbon is not the only environmental impact cities are having. So in this review article we did a couple of years ago, we really examined how urbanization is really linked to the environment, and we tried to understand what are some of the conceptual and empirical advances that are made during the past 10 years or so. So in this paper, we could identify some of the emerging trends and remaining questions in urban environmental research. For example, we can observe an increasing evidence on the amplified or accelerated environmental impact of urbanization. Again, you can notice the word accelerated here. And we could see a varying distribution patterns of impacts along the geographical and other socioeconomic gradients. And there's a shifting focus from understanding and quantifying the impacts of urbanization towards understanding the processes and mechanisms underlying these changes. And I'd really like to highlight this because in the early days in urban research, we were really focusing on quantifying the impact and then understanding, the spatial pattern of the distribution. But moving forward, I think this is really, really important for us to understand what are the processes that are driving this and what are the underlying mechanisms that are shaping these kind of patterns. Because unless we understand this, there's no way we can change and transform the pathways. And we also noticed an increasing focus on understanding the complex interactions and interlinkages among different environmental, social, economic, and cultural processes. And there has been a conceptual advance that really calls for articulating and using a systems approach in cities. And also in terms of the governance, there's an increasing focus on public participation and co-production of knowledge with stakeholders. And we know cities are actively experimenting towards sustainability and a plethora of guiding, concepts that manifest these different aspirational goals with varying levels of implementation and effectiveness. So before I go into transformation used by upscaling innovation, I would like to briefly mention this concept of urban environmental evolution. This concept was based on our work in 8 case study cities in East Asia and combined with many other works, of course. Those 8 case study cities, we had case study team and conducted in-depth case studies. So through examining these studies, we realized the urban environmental change probably can best be conceptualized using the urban environmental evolution sort of concept. And in this concept, there are 4 key elements. For example, cities are complex systems subject to constant change, which is resemble to a dynamic sort of evolutionary process. And if you look at different cities, they all have really diverse profile with commonalities in their different trajectories. But if you compare those trajectories, again, you can see a very strong nonlinearity in different trajectories. And these different trajectories are really shaped by a unique combination of endogenous and exogenous forces. And I'm talking about this because in order to transform, it is very important that cities have the flexibility to transform, to change their course. And since if we really conceptualize the urban environmental change with this evolutionary sort of view, and then consider the trajectories can be shaped with endogenous and exogenous factors, then we have established that the future trajectory of urban environment can really be changed through internal and external forces that are working on an urban system. So just quoting this IPCC 1.5 degree special report, we really need a rapid and far-reaching transition in order to achieve the Paris goal. But again, transition and transformation is not really easy because there are economic, institutional, and social cultural barriers that may inhibit these urban and infrastructure system transitions. But fortunately, we also know that cities are the loci where are lots of innovations, be it technological, cultural, social, or governance practice. There are lots of innovations that are happening in urban space. And some of these innovations can be conceptualized as urban sustainability experiment. So this is the concept we came up during the IHDP IT core project era, and the science steering committee of that core project have came up a couple of publications really talking about sustainability experiment and urban sustainability experiment in particular. So the sustainability experiments are really planned initiatives that embody a highly novel social-technical configurations that are likely to lead to substantial environmental and sustainability gains. And these can be really small initiatives. It's not mainstream at all at the moment. And where the earliest stage of a process of social-technical learning can take place. And they typically really bring together new networks of actors with different knowledges, capabilities, and resources, and they cooperate in a process of learning. So we could see there are many these kind of urban sustainability experiments. If we look around, many of them are happening, are not really well noticed or documented. So we think it is really important to look at these individual successful cases and then try to understand what really makes them, why they happen, looking at triggers and in what ways they happen, in what kind of actor networks, and what kind of barriers they are encountering, and what kind of pathways eventually they follow. So this is really trying to look at individual, experiment. But in order to look at the upscaling this successful experiment so that we can have larger scale of systemic change, I think there are three things that is really important for us to look at. For example, we really need to explore how these individual successful innovations can actually be used to change the upper level system. So that unless you can change, go beyond your current system where the experimentation is happening, you cannot really achieve a larger scale change. So the question is how individual innovation can really change the system. And the second one is how can these individual, successful innovations can be multiplied, can be copied, and then, proliferated in other spaces, in other places. So the question is how innovations can work across different cases, different cities. And then the third important question to ask is that, we cannot just do one successful experimentation and then stop there, right? We really need to encourage cities to go on and then sustain their momentum and then keep innovating. So how a city can keep innovating and keep experimenting so that they are on the right track of keep improving their towards the sustainability. So I would like to give you one example that are speaking to each of these three elements from our own work. The first one is how can we make sure that individual small experiment and then the success element of it can be absorbed to change the upper scale system. So this is based on a case study, in-depth case study looking at low carbon transition in Shanghai city. So after this case study, we could identify a nested structure of innovation that we call this, where small scale experiments are happening within Shanghai city, organized by different institutional setup in the city, and through this kind of different successful experimentation, the city can absorb the element of success and then try to inform the city level policy and then their coordination mechanism or financial mechanism of how do you do this low carbon transition within city level. But then at the national level, Shanghai city is just one of the pilot city of this low carbon transition in China. So within this this national policy, they have many this kind of pilot city, like Chongqing, Xiamen, or Wuhan. They're all this kind of pilot city like Shanghai. And if similar processes are happening within each of these cities, then the learning from this at the city level can also be aggregated to inform the national policy in terms of driving the low carbon transition at the national level. So there's this, you can see a nested structure of innovation for this low carbon transition. And this is another example of looking at how innovation actually works across different cities. And this is looking at how I think it was energy contract initiative, energy contract practice, which will, I think, adopted in Europe and USA first. And then the Shanghai city is trying to adopt this particular, they had actually adopted this particular innovation. And we examined in detail how this process of adopting somebody else's successful innovation and contextualize it is actually happening. So through in-depth study, we realized the contextualization process and trying to adopt a successful innovation into a city actually involves lots of processes that are very similar to what was happening in the original sustainability experimentation in the original site. So it involves, realignment of actors, realignment of resources, and realignment of institutional arrangements. And the outcome of this realignment might be quite different from what was the outcome of the original city that conducted the original experimentation. So this process, we realized this contextualization is actually a new innovation rather than a simple copy and paste, because and this can in a way explain why many of the innovation that have proven to be successful are not readily transferable, are not instantly copied by others, because it again involves internal processes that are very similar to the new innovation. And we think understand this kind of process is really important for us to be able to accelerate the multiplication of innovation. And this is another paper we did recently, I think 2019. They're looking at how a city can become a front runner in terms of sustainability and then keep being a front runner. So in this paper, we have coined the concept of positive inertia and proactive influencing in these front runner cities. And here we looked at Kitakyushu City in Japan, which was notorious in their environmental pollution during the 1950s and 60s. But now it has become one of the real front runners in sustainable cities quest, and has been really strongly, heavily, praised for their effort. So we looked at how they actually did it and how they could keep being a front runner for over more than 20, 30 years now. So we found that a front-runner city can actually produce environmental and economic benefits and opportunities, both within and beyond its boundary, through urban experimentation that contribute to sustainability transition. And these positive changes towards sustainability are created and sustained by a succession of self-reinforcing feedback loops involving different actors like citizens, businesses, local and national government. And this positive inertia we have coined here is really trying to describe an emergent property of the city as a system, where this positive approach are actually embedded into the city's identity, and therefore is not easily influenced or changeable by short-term political cycles. And we would like to make the distinction between this positive inertia and momentum, because momentum is something that you build, whereas positive inertia is something that you have already embedded it into your city's identity, into your system's characteristic. So it is very difficult to change it. And once we got this inertia in a right way, then it's in a way it's we have set it up in a right track, and you don't really have to pay too much probably initial sort of attention or effort try to build up the momentum. So this is a system dynamic sort of diagram explaining how Kitakyushu's sustainability experimentation has built this positive inertia through different positive reinforcing loops, with different actors becoming the major actor in each of these different kind of loops. And once these kind of reinforcing loops are formed at a systemless level, and they innovate, they are just to some extent becoming an autopilot kind of process. I think I'll just skip this one. This is another one looking at financing, how local level finance can actually change the institutional collaboration again, this is in the city of Shanghai. So before I conclude, I'll really briefly talk about our work within the Earth Commission. So we think the challenge that are facing us is really try to define and navigate forward a safe and just future for people and planet. Because we all know the Earth is really living the Holocene, which has supported our entire history of civilization over the last 8,000 or 10,000 years. And then we are really entering this Anthropocene. So in a way, this is very unknown kind of future. We could end up in a very unsafe future in terms of environmental future and as well as the societal future. Whereas, on the other hand, we could also end up in a safe and just sort of space of the planet. So the challenge is really for us to identify what is this safe and just corridor for the people and planet. And within this Earth Commission, we are actively working on this topic. And I would like to mention this because within the Earth Commission, we have 5 working groups. And the 5th working group is really on cross-scale translation, trying to connect the cities and businesses into the planetary limits and targets. For example, like I think many of you have heard of planetary boundary concept. So for many cities, it's very difficult to understand what is exactly the link between, a city like in Canberra, like I am right now, to the planetary level sort of limits. What does that mean? How do I establish that connect? So this working group 5, we're trying to really identify, explore the methodological sort of issues of how do you actually conduct this cross-scale translation and connect the urban level phenomena, impacts and everything into the planetary level limits and targets. So for the moment, I'm chairing this working group, and we have scientists, about 15 scientists, again, globally distributed 15 scientists, trying to really actively working on and then establish the link between, methodological link between the planetary level limits and then the city level actions. So here are some of the references I briefly mentioned in this talk. And with this, thank you for your attention, and over to you, Chairperson.
Okay. Thank you very much for your inspiring talk. Before I introduce our second speaker, I also would like to let Professor Bai and our participants know that in January, the kickoff forum for urban working group in Taipei, we also conclude some issues, try to meet the research gap. And in addition to, in accordance to the research priorities for the science plan of Urban Can, and the Taipei Working Group try to pay attention to the trajectory of transitional urbanization in between the developed cities and the developing cities. And this is also reminded by Professor Xiaoxin Huang, Michael Xiao, to all the local participants. And today, our second speaker, Professor Zirun Alan Lin, he served as the representative of the Future Earth Taipei Urban Working Group to present the progress report related to the today the first session. And because in our kickoff forum, the local working group get the consensus that we have to all need to encourage local researchers and practitioners working on the net zero transition. And Professor Lin, he's the expert in this field. He's my colleague at the International Degree Program of Climate Change and Sustainable Development, National Taiwan University. His main affiliation is at the Department of Political Science. He's one of the middle-aged scholars in Taiwan who are pioneered in the subfield of environmental policy and politics, and are particularly specialized in the perspective of deliberative governance. He's also the Deputy Executive Director of the Office of Energy and Carbon Reduction under Executive Yuan of Taiwan government. At that position, he has been contributed to a great extent in linking the policy and science for energy and climate governance in Taiwan. So the floor is yours, Professor Lin. Let you start your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Zhou, for your kind introduction. And thank you, everyone. Good afternoon, and also good morning for somewhere. And I would like to, it's been an honor to join this Future Earth as a panel. And I think from this, in the following, I just would like to briefly introduce what we have done. Actually, with Professor Zhou, we have done a survey earlier and for a preliminary research. I open the slides. Can you see the slides?
Yes, we can see. Oh, yes,
okay.
It works perfectly.
Okay, great. So in the following 10 to 20 minutes, I would like to briefly overview what we have done for a brief survey and just done in the past few months for about the energy action frameworks in Taiwan. So in the following, I will try to identify the research landscape of what we have done for the net zero transition, because we all know this is a very important subject in the coming decades. And I would like to first give a brief overview of what in Taiwan, and also identify what the 6 knowledge action framework for net zero emission out of tons of literature and also some practitioner technical reports. And then we'll show the survey results and the brief conclusions. So actually, just last month, I just came back from the Glasgow, UK. Well, these 2 weeks long international negotiations. So it actually once again highlights for the next decades, also 3 decades for the net zero emission for humanity. So it's kind of a very important global value conference. And what's the goal for the COP26? I just briefly, first is about the net zero emission. Actually, that terms is probably the widely known is back to the Paris Agreement in 2015. For science, it will be much earlier, but for the international negotiation, it come into the text is that actually dates back to a Paris Agreement in 2015. And then since then, the several countries, especially in Europe, for example, Sweden, UK, they announced that they are going to net zero emission, or we call carbon neutrality. Sometimes we know that in science, and more specifically, there are some difference, but in policy, they are interchangeable for these terms, for net zero emissions, for carbon neutralities. So once again, the country has co-on, and right now is for about over 130 countries that have announced that a target for net zero emission by 2050. Or some country, for example, in China, they are 2060, India 2070, and some countries are earlier for 2040 or 2045 in Germany, for Germany. So for this conference, they now reassure that most countries are agreed. Most countries agree that they are trying to keep that target. According to some think tank, they do some calculation. If we maintain that the Glasgow target on pledges, probably we can a little below 2 degrees Celsius, roughly about 1.8 degrees Celsius. So that's why the president of UK saying that of the COP26 saying that we keep the 1.5 degrees Celsius alive. And second would be Mobilize the finance, about 100 billion in climate finance, and also the protect the habitat and ecosystems. And finally, that's very important for the carbon market, the global carbon market, is try to finish the negotiation about Article 6 of Paris Agreement, which means that we finalize and complete the Paris rule book, which has been delayed for a couple of years from now. So I just highlight just a few. I won't go very detailed. They're basically that all the media saying that we keep the 1 degree alive, because we actually, many people are updating the national determined contributions to trying to enhance their ambitions for 2030. And also we'll make a long-term goal for 2050 into their policy. And also we will make all this technical and also finance situation more transparent, so that they will create, we call this enhanced transparency framework. And also in the individual countries, they will try to align their national determined contribution in common time frame, and also the format of their national determined contribution. There will be a global static in 2023. So after next year, the IPCC will announce that the remaining 2 groups, their result. And then based on their scientific reports, they will ask each individual country to review and try to enhance their national determined contribution. So there will be a global static in 2023. There will be very important time frame. And then we'll enhance the adaptation finance. So the developing country, once again, they try to reaffirm the 100 billion. Initially, they have announced that in 2009, but long delayed. They never fulfilled that promise. Now they will try to. They say the promise they will have the 100 billion by 2023, and then they will enhance that the finance pledge after 2025, and then the Article 6. So now we see that the net zero transition will become basically we can say this is a global goal. And we the research team, Professor Zhou and another colleague, we identify from out of this all the published report about net zero transition, especially over the 5-6 year, that we create this we call the knowledge action framework in net zero transitions. So basically, we identify this 6 area of research, or we can say have been published or have been funded. Roughly, we have a political system, social system, economic system, technology system, built environment, which reflect what we have talked about urban camp here, and then natural system. So I probably will have no time to go very detailed, but basically we can see that in the political system, a governance institute, technology system, and also natural system, these 3 systems which we found most literature has been published currently. So this also reflects what we have done in Taiwan. Most of the researchers here are highly interested in the more governance policy issue, and also technology and some natural science. Probably they show the general turn. And in the political system, we will try to identify some area about people are interested about the governance mechanism in international, urban, subnational, or some multi-level, and also the people are interested in some intergenerational justice issue and the policy tools. And the fourth, for the social system, people are interested in research equity and also citizen participation, gender issues, and also grassroots movement. And now there's also a new emerging idea about just transition, also has been received widely attention about just transition during this net zero or energy transition. And also people are also concerned about behavior change, which has been identified by IEA report for this the global transition. Economic system also dominant is also very important about there are many people are interested about carbon pricing, cap trade, emission trading system, and also about the green finance. And also they are talking about industrial transformation, about some specific industrial sector, for example, the electric or petrochemical. And there are some people, and there are also some emerging idea issues about circular economy that has been discussed in Europe and some other research teams. For the technological theme has been widely, mostly focused on the renewable energies. So renewables will be the key, especially focused on solar and PV and some other biomass, geothermal, and many kinds of energy. They are also talking about also research focused on CCSU or CCUS, carbon storage and carbon capture and storage and use. And also there are some focus about the efficiency and energy conservation. And there are also many people now focus on they're interested about electric vehicles, EV, and hydrogen. Hydrogen will be it will be growing interest, I think, in the field, not just in research, also in the commercial area. And also the energy story has also widely been discussed. For the built environment, Professor Bai has mentioned a lot about the priority area for the urban. But for this net zero transition, most people focus on the net zero emission buildings. This quite challenging. So there are some area that focus on some the cement or the carbon neutral steel and other kind. So they are talking about infrastructure for the urban, how to toward for more friendly for EV system or green transportation. And also for natural systems, they are also for water, for climate system, for water, food, energy, and also ocean biodiversity and nature-based solution, and also ecological system. So they are talking about the system change. So mostly we'll see that for policy, from this overview, from the policy side, you will see this the national once again commit for this net zero transition for the next decade or next 3 decades. And for the research, also you will see the trend in highly rapidly growing in natural system, in governing system, and also in technological system. And also basically environmental system also receive highly interest. After this two review, but I just go briefly about what Taiwan is doing about energy transition. I would like to do this very quickly. It actually back to 2016 when the President Taiwan embarked this kind of a ambitious energy transition plan. President Tsai actually announced that we are talking for core value, try to ensure energy security for stable, affordable energy supply, and trying to also use this as try to create a green job for green or green energy economies, and also trying to maintain the environmental sustainability, because during this energy transition we increase renewable and phase out nuclear, and also use the hydrogen as a transition. So which means at all this transition come together, we reduce CO2 emission, also reduce air pollution. And also during this process, trying to engage people to participate during the policy process. Actually, there's some policy and regulatory framework. Initially, they have an amendment for Electricity Act. This is quite important because over 20 years, they have never been amended, and open the market for renewables and they'll introduce the user purchase options. Also, we have a policy engagement, kind of a deliberative process to invite 60 people, discuss about a year to produce, we call the Energy Transition White Paper, which announced about 1 year ago. And then also amended the Renewable Energy Act, and then also announced the smart grid energy systems. So all this system, all this together, we target energy development, also energy saving, and also energy storage and systems. So Google announced the first Asia Green Energy Project in Taiwan. They purchased the first green energy in Asia. And also we'll see this combined solar fishing or solar different buildings. We also, there's agricultural farming during below this solar PV on the top. And you will see this also, there's a farming for duck, for a different kind of animals. And also introduce the green offshore wind farm. Now has already 2 wind farm has already completed, and the next year there was some more coming in online. Now because there's some delay because the COVID-19, some technical person cannot enter Taiwan because of border control, but is now getting reach the target. About the greenhouse gas emission in Taiwan, this just very briefly, because actually the peak in Taiwan is in 2007. So we already passed that peak in 2007. Now it's going down. Actually, you will see in the 2019, 2020, and even 2021, we are going down. But now the civil society organization trying to do this more quickly, and to try to reach so certain maybe 20 or 30% by 2030. Now the President Tsai announced this year in the Earth Day, saying that Taiwan will go for 2050 net zero. So they will become a national target. And then now the EPA, Taiwan, and the Office of Energy and Carbon Reduction, my office is looking into and explore the pathway toward that targets. And actually, we will see this figure. You'll see actually the economic growth in Taiwan's greenhouse gas emission has already decoupled, and which means that we maintain the green GDP in growth, and also we reduce greenhouse emission intensity. So we'll see this back to around 2010. And now we revised the target. Initially, we just according to the 2015, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction and Management Act, we trying to reduce greenhouse emission in 2050, back to 2050 level for 50%. But now they totally changed. After the 6 years, now we are now going to net zero by 2050s. And also we'll introduce the carbon pricing in Taiwan. So this will be the first time, probably next year, or will be written into law. And for the government side, trying to look into the net zero emissions, this task force has been established in 2019. At that time, we focus divided into 5 subgroups. The first we call the mitigation and energy, try to enhance and scale up all the renewable energies, and also introduce hydrogens and enhance the electricity system. For example, the smart grid, energy storage, that kind of systems. And for the second, because Taiwan is highly dependent on the export industry, and also we have a very highly energy intensity industry, for example, petrochemical, cement, also electricity. Many people know that the DSMC for electricity, they manufacture a lot of chips and export globally, but they consume electricity in Taiwan. And now they try to enhance their energy efficiency and change their energy process, their industrial process. Now the good thing is a major industry in this different energy intensity. Even the petrochemical leader in Formosa Plastic also announced they are going to carbon neutral by 2050s. And then the third group will be the green transportation, the EV. And so we are trying to introduce more EV, and also in Taiwan, we are more electric scooters in Taiwan. So there will be a policy and to promote these two, and also some other green transportation for bike. And then for the negative emission, we try to introduce and CCUS, and also forest as a think tank, also investigate the blue carbons. And for the governance, basically they're trying to establish a permanent governing body, try to organize and monitor all this, facilitate this process, and also amend the law, introduce finance, and also the citizen engagement will all be discussed in governance. And then back to what the research we have done recently, that we doing the survey because we have a very short time. So at that time we are not doing a broader survey, but I think we have some very representative population target. So we use the Future Earth Research Network in Taiwan there, and recently now have introduced some different kind of a can, urban can, or different water for energy can, and also some environmental NGO. So now there are lots of this may be one of the representative and research network in Taiwan. So we distribute a survey to these scholars. And also in I mentioned in the government side, there's a task force, five task force. They frequently invite some scholar to have some kind of a scenario research network, and then research conference, and also meetings. So we distribute about 49. Actually, the scholar during that consultative process is growing, but at the time we got the name list for 49, so we distributed. So totally around 180. We distribute about 180 surveys questionnaire, and then the response rate is 34. I think it's also good. It's for 34 in such a short time. And for the question, we divide it into four areas. Basically, we try to know that the research experience, because we are thinking because this is actually is a very important issue for the next generation, 30 years from now to 2030. So for the early career scholar, for the young scholars, so what they foresee that the future for their research. So this is what we identified, and we designed that research. And also we are designed a few questions about the working group, about if they can have some policy engagement or research engagement. And then we have some policy recommendations. Now we show some results. So basically for the return, the response, mostly responsive, they come from the academic and research institute, around 67. And some come from think tank. There's about 33. And for the ages, is 43%. This over 50 years old, and then there's a 33% is around 40 to 50, and there's a 6% under 40s. And for the experience, they say 98 responsive saying they know the concept for the energy transition, or or carbon neutrality, climate neutral, they have heard about it. So it's quite high. So mostly interview or responses, they're saying they have already known. And also 60% they know they have a relevant experience for net zero. They say this topic they have some familiarities. And 84% interview have the intention to conduct net zero transition research in the future. It's quite high. And also there's a 40 responses saying that they have experience with the net zero transition in the past. And also 22 come from academia and 80 come from public and private think tank. Because over the past few years, some private think tank, they have been contracted by the government. So they have already started to look into that issues. And also 53 the responses with the intention to conduct this in the future. And 33 from academia, 20 from the public. And for the specific topic, their response, they a little difference. For the think tank, you will see them mostly focus on some economic and climate finance, industrial decarbonization. But for the researcher, they are focused on social system, natural system, technological, and also they are talking about climate justice. And also they are working more broadly, ocean, forest, agriculture, land use. They are also interested about the building human habitats, urban planning, infrastructure. And the common topic from both groups of researchers, mostly they all agree the governance system. For example, the climate policy and the energy policy and all these governing system are quite important. In the future, they are mostly most responsive. They saying that they are trying highly interested about climate risk and so transition governments in the future. And also people some show interest about trade and economic tools. And also technological system, there's also received much attention about, especially for the renewable energy research in the future, and also CCU, CCS, carbon capture technology. And for the natural system, the number one, it will be about water, energy, food nexus. And for the different ages group, young scholar, early career scholar, the number one is the climate policy governance, and then the law, carbon pricing, industrial decarbonizing, and the net zero building. The number before that, this means the number, or this is the number count. Net zero building has 2 people response. And for that, the experienced scholar, we mean that over 50 years old. The number 3 will be energy efficiency and also industrial low carbon transitions. And also for the comparison, we have identified this more detail. We'll see that industrial process, also digital transition, system innovation has been mentioned. And also there are people mentioned about sustainable city transition and the consumption pattern, behavioral change. And for the experienced people, they are interested about agriculture and land use, and also trade and economic tool also in the higher rank in experienced researchers. And for the policy engagement, there's 70% know about the government has already set up this working group, and 63% have not does not have the experience in participate in this policy discussion, and 88% saying that they have joined that in the group. And then for the policy recommendation, the frequency, the number one will be carbon pricing. There's also maybe in the media, I don't know, in the media and also globally or in locally, the carbon pricing has been widely discussed, especially for carbon fee, and also EPA. They announced that probably they will coming for, they also in design some carbon trading. And also from the outside Taiwan's border in EU, in last year, they announced that they're probably trying to implement the carbon border adjustment mechanism, the CBAM, So they receive lots of media coverage. So that's why carbon pricing, I guess, we guess that that's why they receive the most highly cited. And also low carbon, zero carbon, negative carbon has been mentioned for their priority. And they are also they are interested about the pathway, the planning, how to reach that 2050 net zero. And also 7 people, they identify they are interested about green transportation, EV, and also 6 people about industrial transition and also energy transition. Finally, there are 3 people interested about energy saving solutions. And also, we also look into the government funded project, especially there's a government different out of the National Science Foundation most, and government there's some specific project they work with some think tank. So the GRB system is basically the system of Taiwan's basic data about how the government contract conduct the research. So we also look into that in the past 3 years. They will see that the governing system will be there are 60 report. They are relevant to the governance system. There are 15 report relevant to economic systems, 41 for about technical system and natural system. So we'll see there's almost nothing for about social system during the 5-year relevant to net zero subject. In conclusion, that on the government side, actually the government has already targeted to 2050 net zero, and they will amend the law to including the carbon pricing and adaptation. For the research for that what we see for the research landscape about the net zero now or in the future, we'll see the research community in Taiwan show high awareness about the trend, over 95%, and about the net zero development globally or locally. And also we see the research gap exists in 6 dimensions we identify. And the third, the researcher in Taiwan, mostly they try to extend their existing study to tackle net zero challenge. They are quite interested, about 60%. And finally, the early career scholars tend to explore more about transdisciplinary subject. And they are also concerned more about that value system change and more social concern. The highly relevant from the GRB result. And they are also concerned about how to engage and conduct a net zero relevant study for early career scholars. Okay, thank you so much for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Lin. I just left a message in the chat box because I don't control the time well. We only have 15 minutes left for discussion. So would you please try to leave your questions in the chat box as well? You can also raise your hand. Yeah. So if I don't see any participants raise hand, we can just follow the questions in the chat box. Is there any questions from our participants? Not yet. Sometimes I will miss the people raise the hand, so just try to remind me, Yinshen. So if
I saw a question.
When we are waiting for the questions, Professor Lin and Bai, can you just look at the chat box?
Yep.
There's one question for Professor Lin, and I also left a question for Professor Bai. So Professor Bai, Sumei Bai.
Yeah, I'm trying to come back.
Okay. Yeah. So.
Oh yeah, I found my question.
Sorry. One question is from me, but I can reserve that for others. So others. From have you seen it? One question is regard to how the local central government take the innovations into policy. to support the urban transition process?
So should I go first?
Okay, sure, please.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think the question is how the local central government take the innovation into policy to support the urban transition process. Yeah, this is a good question. I think very often, our local central government, we already have existing system, for example, existing energy system or existing transportation system. And it is quite hard for new sort of emerging kind of technologies or approaches to find a niche, to actually have a place to exist and have a space to experiment and survive and then eventually grow to replace the currently dominating sort of regime, right? So I think it is very important for the local government or central government to create that kind of space to allow different small initiatives to incubate them, so that, and then support them so that they can experiment in that small space, and then eventually, if the outcome is good, they can eventually become the main domain, kind of regime, the main sort of regime that replace the current unsustainable kind of regime. So I guess, yeah, just in a word, create space and provide support. And it doesn't have to be, just support one of the activities in particular. You probably can support several different activities at the same time. So just in case one of them or two or three of them can become, really successful and then grow into something big. So I think this mentality of experimentation and the mentality of creating space and plurality is really important for decision makers to be able to incubate innovation and harness the fruit of the successful innovation, and then reflect that into your own transition process and more desirable sort of future.
Okay, Hongguang, do you want to show up, to turn on your screen to let us know? I'm sorry, I did not ask you to present your own question. Hongguang, right? Hongguang. Anyway, so how about Zhen?
So I'm sorry, I'm not in the good shape, so I'm not.
Oh, okay, okay,
Sorry.
okay. So you already heard the answer from Professor Bai.
Yeah. Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay.
Thank you
So
very
how
much,
about
Professor
Xiao
Bai.
Chuan Zhen?
Hi,
Do
thanks
you
for a
want to
great talk.
present your question by yourself,
Yeah, sure.
Professor Lin?
Sure. Hi, thanks for a great talk. I have a question for Professor Lin. I'm wondering how the government is going to invest the carbon sink and where the funding come from carbon fee. Thank you.
Okay, that's briefly. The interesting. Actually, I just mentioned that the government right now they have the task force. They're looking into 5 areas of subject. So for the carbon sink, they are we call it a negative carbon. Negative carbon. That's the subgroup. Will look into the issue. Now they look into, many people they have been talking about 10 years about CCUS. So they will look for, but some are commercial, less commercial, some are commercial, and some are not mature. So they will first look into that the CCUS, and also they'll look into the forest. So forest also will be target, but for Taiwan, there's a forest area. As far as I know, that's already kind of mature. So they are looking into if they can have more to increase than the carbon sink from forest. And also they are looking about the blue carbon, and also some from bioagriculture. So they are looking into that, for example, for wetland or from that area. So for your next question there about the funding will come from carbon fee. Yes, there will, if the law pass next year, they will establish funds. They will try to facilitate for this carbon reduction and adaptation. So there will some fund to devote into research. But also we are trying to, in the government side right now, they are also looking to if they have some new fundings, additional funds. to support this all kind of research and also policy practice.
Thank you for the great news.
Okay, thank you. Since there are no more questions, so Professor Bai, my question is with regard to your opinion related to the urban living lab approach to urban transition experiment, and that is also related to Hong Guang's question with regard to the Sandbox policy experiment.
Yeah, I'm not very familiar with the Sandbox policy experiment, but just judging from what it sounds, I guess that is linked indeed. Part of the you try out your policy at a much smaller scale to see how it works before you actually introduce a large scale policy. I think that's the spirit probably is the same. And in terms of urban living lab, I think it's absolutely is a very important approach. Try to harness some learning from small scale, like a community, a small, a small complex development, or designing a new community. Things like that are often part of this urban living lab. It is including this urban living lab, but I think I would say urban sustainability experiments is not only limited to the urban living lab, because sustainable urban experimentation could be also about policy, about particular, innovation of different kind of approach, but it can also be a cultural sort of innovation. So the urban living lab is very often when you have something physical, right? And then play around a building or a complex, things like that. But the urban sustainability experimentation doesn't have to be something that is so tangible that links to a community or links to a building. So yeah, I think it certainly include that, but not necessarily limited to that. And I think urban living lab is a great way of testing things out, testing new technology out, and then harness the learning.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we have two more minutes to take one more questions. Oh, okay. Hong Guang, you also raise your hand again. So do you want to present your question by yourself?
Yes, yeah, actually, I want also to say hello to Professor Bai because I read a lot of her article and also her sharing. Yeah, just also back to the last one, and so I like very much the concept of urban living lab. But just to come back to the innovation aspect, I would like to ask maybe if there is a chance that we can, for example, develop or take it into account, for example, in terms of law, because I think actually the experiments is very good, but to make it really become more institutionalized so that the government can take the innovation into more like serious, so that they can yeah. So I also like Professor Bai mentioned about the upscaling. So what do you think also about that in terms of the legislation or more I mean ties governance? Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm also very interested in the perspective of institutional innovation. So Professor Bai, what's your feedback about this question?
Yeah, I mean, I think experimentation, if you keep conducting experimentation at city level, it very often requires institutional rearrangement very often, as the case study that I just showed about the low carbon transition in Shanghai. And eventually over time they have built up this nested structure of innovation, how you can harness the small scale learning up to inform the upper scale policy making or policy measures sort of implementation as well. And also when you try to adopt somebody else's successful experimentation, it also requires kind of institutional rearrangement in order to make that happen. So I would really say, I mean, the institutional elements is integral part of this sustainability experimentation, especially when it involves modern, simple technological innovation. And even the technological innovation, when you try to get that adapted and embedded into the society, very often it requires new kind of institutional arrangement. And it's quite interesting in the urban innovation and transition literature. I think probably two of the most frequently mentioned barriers are institutional barriers, and then also the financial barriers. And I think in the study I skipped over, it shows actually some of the city level financial mechanism, if you design it well, actually can be used to catalyze the institutional changes. For example, like some of the low carbon special fund designated to do the climate mitigation, you probably can make it a mandatory requirement to say at least 2 or 3 governmental department has to collaborate in order to be able to apply for this particular fund. Then, you know, you really inevitably for those institutional silos actually start to collaborate each other so that they can get those sort of funding. So I think city level, they don't really have a huge amount of finance, but if you can design it and use it, you know, really smartly, then you can expect some of the cascading, leveraging kind of effect coming out from your initiatives.
Okay, I'm afraid that I have to close this session because we will have 3 talks in the second session. So everybody need to take some time for rest. So thank you very much, Professor Bai and Professor Lin. Thanks for your inspiring talk. Please take a rest.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Yixuan, do you have anything to announce?
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Zhou. Please come back at 3 p.m. or in 10 minutes. 3 p.m. UTC +8. Thank you. See you later.
我晚上会睡不着。
Hi, is everyone back yet? Hello, we're about to start.
你有连上吗？你的有上来了吗？
Okay, so Professor Huang, would you like to have some words to the participants?
Oh, I think Geos can just start to chair this panel. It's about time.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
Go
I
ahead,
think
please, Geos.
Everyone. So my name is Jules Yoon, and I'm a science officer at the Future Earth Global Hub Japan. And I'm very delighted to be here as part of the co-organizing team together with Future Earth Taipei and the Urban Knowledge Action Network to convene this panel on one of the research topics that has been put on the priority list of the Urban Knowledge Action Network, called Navigating Global Environmental Change. And I'd like to invite the three speakers to just say hi, so everybody can get familiar with you. So I'll introduce you one by one. So first we'll be having Şir Kilkis, who's a docent senior researcher at the Scientific and Technological Research Council of Turkey, also known as TÜBİTAK. Hi, Şir.
Greetings to everyone. Good afternoon.
For joining us. The next speaker will be Ying-Che Lee, who's an associate professor of the Program of Landscape and Recreation at the National Chongqing University. Hi,
Yes, hello
Professor.
everyone. Good afternoon.
Joining us. And then next we will have Dr. Jose Siri, who was until recently at the Wellcome Trust and is now working as an independent consultant. Welcome, Jose.
Hi, Gilles. Good to be here. Thanks.
Joining us. I know it's early for you. So without further ado, I would like to give the word to Dr. Şir Kilkis, who will talk about navigating global environmental change by connecting it with knowledge and action in urban systems. And I believe she will also mainly be doing that from her work with the IPCC, among other activities. So Kilkis, the floor is yours. Oh, you're muted, I think.
Good afternoon to everyone. And I will be sharing my presentation, Navigating Global Environmental Change by Connecting Knowledge and Action Urban Systems, which is very important for us as the Future Earth Urban Knowledge Action Network. And as mentioned earlier in the presentations, we are working towards trying to develop a research priorities implementation, science and implementation plan as the Urban Knowledge Action Network. And this theme is relating to the theme or priority, research priority of navigate environmental change, but related to all of the other research priorities. And why are all of these research priorities important? All of them have a role in supporting the more sustainable urban system futures. So through accelerating, ensuring, amplifying, negotiating, this one is focusing how the urban systems can navigate both the local and global environmental change and their interactions. So this is a research priority that's connected across the other priority themes. And we do have some research questions, but I will not be sharing all of them, but just selected ones. So these are some of the selected guiding research questions, including, for example, how can cities adapt to and reduce risks from climate change and other environmental changes through integrated action? So this includes the integration of mitigation, adaptation, And how can urban areas navigate global environmental change with perspectives that consider systemic risks, because these are all connected and one risk can lead to another and vice versa? And how can cities ensure food, water, and energy security in an era of non-stationarity and large-scale migration? So it's a dynamic process, but how will cities ensure these important human necessities for the urban inhabitants? And where are the opportunities for cities to reduce water use and increase efficiency, especially in climates with water stress? So this is another question. And relating to all of this, and maybe even going beyond to biodiversity, one question is, how can planning and governance for urbanization coexist? And here focus specifically on marine and terrestrial protected areas and wildlife. The next question example is, what are the ways that cities can create opportunities and incentives for more sustainable landscapes with biodiversity? So bringing nature back into the city, also relating to some of the publications in relation to the Future Earth Urban Can contributions. And another question that brings more of the social perspective is, what local, indigenous, and scientific knowledge is needed to enhance resilience to multiple and simultaneous hazards? So also utilizing the local and indigenous knowledge and combining this with the scientific knowledge. So here, these are still being populated, but we are using this research priority to explore these and many other research questions. And eventually, one of our aims perhaps could be how we can develop the answers to these questions to provide an integrated toolkit for navigating the environmental change. So from this point onward, I would like to bring some recent findings of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change Working Group 1 contribution to the 6th assessment cycle. And of course, this report on the climate change 2021, the physical science basis, made it exceptionally clear that by 2030, we need to halve the CO2 emissions towards net zero emissions by 2050, as Taiwan is also supporting. And the importance of this scenario is, even the best estimate, it is about 1.5, but maybe 1.6 it can be, and the very likely range is between 1.2 degrees Celsius and 1.8 degrees Celsius. But this is very different from the other scenario, which is more towards the 2 degree and not satisfying the well below 2 degree target. So the cities need to support how the global scene can realize this 1.5 degrees Celsius scenario. And the importance of this, again, if we relate this to the global environmental change, the report also came with an interactive atlas showing how these different scenarios, they will involve different types of climatic impact drivers. And this is including to heat and cold, wet and dry categories, also wind, snow and ice, more relevant for other regions over others, and other type of climatic impact drivers. But all of them have some kind of a connection with what the cities need to be prepared for, both of what they can contribute to reducing the greenhouse gas emissions, but also how they can take integrated action to better prepare for these climatic risks. And about 50 different regions from across the world have been assessed according to these climatic impact drivers, and this interactive atlas gives an opportunity to further explore and try to understand how individually these risks will affect an individual region, but also how they're connected and maybe multiple risks can come into play. So these again are some of the categories. And if we just take a more broad look into the regions, for example, here it's the selection of heavy precipitation and pluvial flood, and with high confidence of increase, it will impact multiple regions across the world, and this is relating more towards around 2 degrees Celsius scenarios. And then this is for the tropical cyclone. So again, this time a little bit medium confidence, but again increasing, especially in the Southeast Asia region, this part of Africa and this part of the Americas, and also the marine heat waves. And the cities are very much connected to their marine, the blue economy, or how the blue economy is supporting the cities. So this is a very interconnected issue also relating to the cities and how they are interconnected to the broader ecosystem as a whole. But here, I would like to go more specifically into the Southeast Asia region because the participants of this online urban forum is supported by Taiwan. So this is the region that Taiwan is taking place, the Southeast Asia. And here we can see, for example, across these categories, heat and cold, wet and dry, wind, coastal, and others, what will be the future changes? What is the confidence of the increase? And what is the trend? And is there a regional attribution? So these are some of the assessments that has been already published from the working group 1. And it's also possible in this interactive atlas to go region by region instead of looking at these risks individually. It is possible to select up to 6 different risks and see how these risks will impact a given region. So here it is only the mean air temperature that's selected now, but of course increase in all the different regions. Next one, for example, because it's also relevant to the Southeast Asia region and many others, let's, for example, choose extreme heat and heavy precipitation and pluvial floods. So here comes the third risks, trying to fill the hexagram with 6 different risks. Then let's, for example, select tropical cyclones here. And this is, for example, affecting the Southeast Asia region and several other regions. For example, relative sea level, especially particularly important for island areas, and also marine heat waves because it's part of the local ecosystem also. So if we fill the possible 6 dimensions of this possible interacting or compound risks and their combinations, it's possible to see how the different settlements, the human settlements in these different regions, they need to be prepared for these different types of climatic impact drivers. So again, if we take the Southeast Asia example, any human settlements, cities in particular in this region, needs to be prepared for a mean increase in the mean air temperature, extreme heat, heavy precipitation and pluvial flood, tropical cyclones, relative sea level, marine heat wave, and many others that's outside of this that's currently not selected. But even from this perspective, the combined perspective of being prepared for multiple climatic impact drivers is important, especially for cities. So if we take this pattern out for the Southeast Asia region, so this is with very high confidence, these first 3 climatic impact drivers relating to mean air temperature, extreme heat, heavy precipitation, and pluvial flood, then with a medium confidence for tropical cyclone, but again with an increase, the relative sea level, the marine heat wave, and these are again with the high confidence. So this is the pattern that's expected for all human settlements in the Southeast Asia region. And similar patterns of the climatic impact drivers, for example, here also in East Asia, or here in East Southern Africa, and here in the Eastern North America, these regions also have similar patterns to the Southeast Asian region. So taking one step and linking this with particularly cities as much as possible, as much as the assessment allows, let's look at the 30 cities with the largest population according to the UN data. So one of the top largest city in projected 2020 urban population is Tokyo. So let's start with this region. So similar to the pattern of Southeast Asia, we see Tokyo, Beijing, Osaka, and other cities following a similar pattern as Southeast Asia. Then the next one, Delhi, again with a similar pattern with a little bit lower confidence for the tropical cyclones. But again, these settlements in this region, particularly cities, need to be prepared for multiple climatic impact drivers. And this includes Dhaka, Mumbai, Karachi, Kolkata, Bangalore, and Shanghai. Then let's look to the next region, and these are ordered in the order of urban population per region. So we have Shanghai, also emphasized in the presentation of Professor Bai, Manila, Guangzhou, and Shenzhen. And then we can go to the a region in America, so Sao Paulo, Buenos Aires, Rio de Janeiro. This time, no tropical cyclones, not relevant for this region, but again, heavy precipitation combined with extreme heat. More dramatic impacts that we're already seeing, but multiple and combined impacts the cities need to be prepared for. Then another region in this part of the world, Mexico City and the urban agglomeration of Los Angeles, Long Beach, Santa Ana. Again, this time also pertinent for the tropical cyclones. And the next region, New York, again, tropical cyclones are possible, and Cairo, also here. The next one, it's not multiple cities per region this time, at least when we look at the largest 30 cities, but we can say Istanbul from the Mediterranean region, Lagos from another region of Africa, and other cities that we see here. And of course, for the landlocked cities or the regions, these are a little bit different pattern this time, but again, multiple impacts are important. And then summing up the 30 largest cities, these are also the patterns relating to the regions of Paris and Bogota. So in this table, this is just a summary of the different selection of the climatic impact drivers. And so, for example, these cities, they will be experiencing similar patterns because they're related to the same region. Then if we go to the other regions, but about 21 of the 30 largest urban agglomerations, they will experience these type of patterns. So how will the urban systems navigate this global environmental change? So again, coming back to the Future Earth Urban Knowledge Network research priority, the question is, how will urban systems, and looking at them as an urban system because of all of their related interactions, the technology, the ecology, and the societal. So what will be the planning, the policies to navigate these type of global environmental changes is one of our priorities. And of course, the choice of any urban system will impact others, both in the case of climate change, both from an adaptation perspective, because there can be compounding and cascading risks across these different cities, and also from the views of integrated mitigation adaptation. And how will one city mitigate will also impact the continued environmental change. So it's a very connected, but with multiple interactions of complex systems. And this makes it even more important to bring together the knowledge and action. So let's look at now a different platform. This is the global human settlement layer. And in this layer, it's possible to compare the total built up area per urban area that's potentially exposed to storm surges. And here, of course, we're again focusing on Taiwan and Taiwanese cities. Because these are based on satellite data, the urban agglomerations, or what is identified as the urban center, may not correspond for all different types of world cities to administrative boundaries, but it's looking at continuous urban built-up area and what is the center of that urban area. So the labeling might be a little bit different, but this is the way it is for all world cities, more or less. So if we look at the total built-up area, we see how it has increased in kilometers squared for these different urban centers. And of course, here we see the potentially exposed total built-up area to storm surges. And the comparison of these shaded bars is about 2000 and 2015. And the share, so this is very high shares, some increasing even more, some reducing, for example, here. But this is not the only problem. Also, because of the built-up materials used, urban areas, they are experiencing both the global warming and urban warming. And what they experience is a total warming, including both. And already, for example, in Japan, nearing 1 degree Celsius, But in Tehran, for example, it is already above 2 degrees. So this is a current perspective, but how it will increase in the future is even more complicated because not even all regions are experiencing, even in a 2-degree scenario, for example, while an area in Taiwan, it might experience on a annual average about 1.8 degrees Celsius change. Where I am coming from, Ankara, Turkey, already in 2 degrees scenario, because the Mediterranean region is heating about 2 times quicker than the world, it will be 4 degrees Celsius in a 2-degree scenario for the world. So this is also another perspective of the differences. So when I look at some of these strategies that is adopted by cities in Taiwan, and here I was able to find the Taipei City Volunteer Local Review published in 2019. And in that report, it was not yet the net zero target. So in 2030, it was a more gradual reduction projected. And this was not sufficient, of course, for limiting global warming to well below the 2 degrees Celsius. But now, as also emphasized in the presentations, I'm very happy to learn that on the Earth Day, a new net zero target for 2050 has been adopted. So this reduction trend will be accelerating. And some of the priorities determined by cities in Taiwan, they're relating to the utilization of recycled materials, electric transport, and for you, green shared transport. So more also about the social innovation, the smart and zero carbon buildings, expansion of renewable energy, including hydrogen energy, of course, and investment in innovative businesses and procurement of low carbon products. So all of this and similar will be important to bring Taipei City and others towards the net zero targets. And also not only the mitigation but adaptation point of view. So some of the cities in Taiwan, they're already adopting and for years been implementing the sponge cities type of implementation. And maybe the next step is going towards the nature positive cities that can provide multiple co-benefits. And the more water or vegetation area there is, it can also reduce some of this total warming at the local level, because the urban heat island effect is differentiating them from the rural areas. So this is just an overview of what I was able to find for Taiwanese cities. But if we look at the region, the cities in the region, what other cities in this region are doing, for example, Tokyo, they also have a zero emission Tokyo strategy for 2050, focusing on many different strategies. One of the biggest urban rail lines is now running on 100% renewable energy coming from hydropower and geothermal energy. Then looking at Singapore, they have a green plan, and they have a plan to quadruple solar energy deployment by the year 2025. But sometimes it's not only sufficient to add policies for renewable energy. It's also important to remove, for example, some of the more inefficient technologies. So phasing out natural gas, for example, in this case, can require extra policies that's currently not in the Singapore Green Plan. Seoul, it aims to reduce the total citywide emissions by 40% by 2030. And it has a designated city center as a green transport zone. So these are some of the possibilities. But what if all of the cities, for example, they go towards 100% renewable energy? So not for a particular sector, but for the entire energy system and supporting their national, maybe similar targets for 100% renewable energy. If we look at some of the per capita benefits and using that for the urban projections, in the 2050, it could be possible to have about $641 billion of energy, air quality, and climate cost savings for Tokyo, Singapore, and Seoul. So if they make the complete transition, and among those scenarios, this blue line would represent the 100% renewable energy scenario. So some of the work that's been shared for city level climate scenarios, but the importance here is the co-benefits. And because urban systems, they're complex, and maybe it's not possible to capture all of this complexity in a single index, but at least it has been attempted. So in the what I'm involved in, the Sustainable Development of Energy, Water, and Environment Systems Index, it is involving 7 dimensions. with 35 indicators relating to energy use and climate, energy penetration, saving measures, renewable energy and utilization, water quality and environmental quality, CO2 and industry, and social innovation or social welfare and urban planning, and R&D and innovation policy. So this was the way the index was constructed. And if you're interested, there's a publication on that also with a data in brief publication. And relating to one of the publication also supported by Future Earth, the 10 New Insights in Climate Science 2021. This is also emphasizing in part the importance of allowing urban systems to reduce their ecological impacts. And because we are living in a common web of life, and this is all connected, including our oceans, our ecosystems, if the cities can do something to limit their impact on coastal development, or if they can reduce their pollution, reducing the eutrophication, the toxins, the plastics, the litter, or because cities are also connected to their blue economies, or if they can make this more sustainable and reduce this direct exploitation, it could also be possible to reduce the impact on these threatened species. So more sustainable urban systems, they're essential for our future, that I would like to emphasize also in this part of the presentation. So by looking at accelerating, ensuring, amplifying, negotiating, and navigating, we can see that navigating the environmental change, both on a local and global level, has a very instrumental role in ensuring the more sustainable urban system futures, and how the urban systems will navigate these environmental changes will determine to a large part what our future Earth will be. So again, thank you very much. We're all trying to contribute with our different expertise, our different research areas, and we're all trying to be agents of change and maybe initiate a butterfly effect for other cities, other urban areas. So with this, I would like to thank you for your kind attention. Thank you very much.
Because that was a wonderful presentation, and I believe it has a lot of relevance both globally and for the local participants in Taiwan. Just quickly, we planned for roughly 20 minutes per presentation here, and I think we're flexibly on time. So we'll take all the questions and discussion points after the two other presentations. So next up, I would like to invite Associate Professor Ying-Chi Lee to begin. The floor is yours. Are you there?
Yeah, there's some technical failure, and they are trying to fix it.
So can you hear me?
Yes. But very quietly, if you could speak up a little bit.
Yeah.
投影片呢？有看得到吗？
看不到。
这个吗？有吗？
Oh, she's trying to upload the PowerPoint. She's trying to upload.
And looks like there is a connection problem.
So 这个吗？
While the technical team is trying to get the slides up, so Professor Lee will be talking about urbanization and global environmental change research in Taiwan, retrospect and prospects. And I think it's a very nice follow-up to the previous presentation where there was both the context of many global risks that are affecting cities locally all over the world in different ways. So I think we're all very much looking forward to how that's going to result in the research expertise and experiences from the past and projections in the future of what impact that's having on
Okay, Jill.
Yeah.
And to upload the PowerPoint. So okay, shift the presentation and let Jose do the presentation first.
Okay, that's good. Jose, are you comfortable with that?
That's fine. Can you hear me?
Yes, but also if you could speak up a bit, then that would be better.
I'll try and speak into the microphone. Let me see if I can share.
Sorry about the change in order.
It's okay.
So Jose is going to talk about how urban health can be an anchor for climate action, reflections on COVID-19, COP26, and the green recovery. You might be interested in knowing that Jose is both in the advisory committee of the Urban Knowledge Action Network and the Health Knowledge Action Network, which makes him a great speaker for this topic. We're all looking forward to learning what your insights on navigating global environmental change. The floor is yours.
Sorry, Gilles, I'm frozen here. Can you still hear me?
We can hear you a little bit, but it's very quiet.
Well, unfortunately, the system's not letting me.
Need to give Jose permission to share his slides?
Yeah. Do you want me to help on sharing your slides?
Yes, that would be great if you could do that.
Okay. Okay, just let me know when are you going to change.
Go ahead and start. If you can put them up. My screen is frozen. I can't tell if you have them up.
Oh, really? You can.
No.
So now it's up.
Okay, so I'm working right now without seeing the slides, so I'm going to assume which slide I'm on, right? So this is the introductory slide. Okay?
Perfect, yeah.
All right, so thanks so much for having me today. It's been really questions. I'm going to take a big picture view and look at the intersection of urban environmental action with health, especially through the lens of COVID-19. And I think it's important that we mention health. That's sort of been implied in the background of a lot of what we're talking about today, but not specifically mentioned. So I want to talk a bit about the big changes we've seen in the world over the past few years and what they mean for urban climate action. So let me start at a global scale. We know that climate change is accelerating even faster than expected, and so are its health impacts. In July this past year, well over 1,000 people died in an unprecedented heat wave in Western North America that also ravaged infrastructure, agriculture, fisheries, and other human and ecological systems. That same month, around the world, torrential rainfall and flooding killed hundreds of people in countries as far apart as Germany, China, India, and Afghanistan. And the images that follow these anecdotes on media and on the internet stick with us, but they're really just the tip of the climate and health iceberg. Next slide. Did the slide change? Yeah, okay. WHO has called climate change the greatest public health threat of the 21st century. Its impacts are both the direct kinds of exposure that we see in these extreme events, but also health outcomes mediated through socioeconomic, ecological, agricultural, and other systems. This complexity means we don't yet have good numbers for the potential health impacts of climate change. The most visible and widely used estimate from WHO is that it'll cause 250,000 extra deaths a year between 2030 and 2050 from malnutrition, malaria, diarrhea, and heat stress. But this is almost certainly a drastic underestimate. It doesn't account for uncertain tipping points in climate systems or cascading risks from the breakdown of other systems or for health impacts related to lost labor productivity or for potential geopolitical impacts and conflicts. Next slide. So we do know that the causes of climate change also contribute massively to ill health. Specifically, the burning of fossil fuels causes enormous co-harms. A new study this past year, that better accounted for the distribution of people in urban areas estimates that fossil fuel burning contributes to around 9 million annual premature deaths from air pollution. It's about double previous estimates. And you can see that the geographic distribution clearly tracks the location of many of the world's largest cities, as we've just heard about in the most recent presentation. Air pollution is one of the fundamental complex challenges that cities have to manage on both their climate and health agendas. But in general, this relationship between climate and health means that tackling the causes of climate change protects health on both the front end through co-benefits and on the back end through lower long-term risks. Next slide, please. Now, just to shift gears a little bit, that air pollution figure of 9 million per year is in the same range of what we've seen during COVID-19. The Economist estimates that the pandemic has caused about 18 million excess deaths globally since it began 2 years ago, about 9 million per year. But the air pollution impacts have been going on for quite some time, without even accounting for the other growing health impacts of climate change. And yet, in this short space, the pandemic has profoundly changed the world in a way that climate concerns have yet to do. It led governments to take drastic, rapid action, often against the lobbying of economic interests. It accelerated technological innovation, for example, related to telecommunications and remote work. It changed the way that many cities use public space and deliver services like transportation, healthcare, education, and more. It has changed all of our expectations, or many of our expectations, of how we will live and work and what we value. It's probable that a very large fraction of the inhabitants of this planet had a conversation about COVID, had a conversation about how it affected their lives, and for many of them it did over the past year. Next slide. Now, why has COVID led to such dramatic action while climate with similar impacts has yet to have a comparable breakthrough moment? And after all, these are the kinds of shifts we'd like to see with respect to climate change. Shifts in policy and practice, innovation, values, and personal expectations about life. I think one reason is that the health threat from the pandemic feels close and imminent, while climate change seems more diffuse. Another is that the link between any one person or city or government's actions is quite clear, and other people's risks is quite clear with COVID. And while that link exists for climate change as well, it's generally along less direct pathways. Also, COVID fits the popular perception of disease as having biomedical origins, whereas climate and health requires more of an eco-social view that understands health as the product of complex environmental risks. And that's harder to sort of grasp and explain. Now, I don't want to strain the analogy here. Obviously, climate change also requires a restructuring of society, infrastructure, economies, and lifestyles far beyond what we've seen with COVID. It's also not clear how durable the changes we've seen during COVID will be. But still, it's noteworthy that COVID has raised the profile of health. It's put health at the center of mind for people, governments, and cities. And this is also happening within the climate discourse. The seeds of this have been growing for some time, but it's clear that COVID has accelerated this centering of health and climate action. Next slide. Now, one recent example of this, of the centering of health and climate action, is at COP26 in Glasgow. We heard a bit about that earlier. By most accounts, the meeting had mixed results at best. There was some progress on finance and other issues, but most of the important details and commitments were kicked down the road to next year or beyond. But in the climate and health research and advocacy community, many are seeing this COP as a singular success. During the run-up to the COP, more than 500 organizations representing 46 million health workers signed an open letter calling on world leaders to deliver on climate action. This was the first COP to include a health program in the presidency portfolio, and the first to include a health pavilion run by WHO, which in this case hosted over 60 events. Over 50 countries committed to developing climate-resilient, sustainable, low-carbon health systems. 14 also committed to net zero deadlines for the health sectors by 2030 to 2050. This is important because it's been hard to get the health community engaged and involved with climate change. And so this is a big shift. Now, I don't think it's a coincidence, next slide, please. I don't think it's a coincidence that this ramping up of the prominence of health, this increase in prominence comes during the pandemic. It makes sense. Not only has health been much more visible, but the pandemic has shed new light on environment health linkages. So for example, people living in areas with high ambient air pollution, usually from poor or marginalized populations, have been more likely to suffer severe consequences from COVID. But this shift in perception, the centering of health, is really important. Why? One, because health professionals are among the most trusted voices in society. One example is that in the United States, nurses have been named the single most trusted profession for 20 years in a row. In a worldwide survey of 140,000 people in 2018, the Wellcome Global Monitor found that health professionals were trusted by 84% of respondents, more than any other group. Health messages are especially likely to be impactful right now, with ordinary people and governments primed to engage and react. Health systems provide a direct link and an institutional architecture with communities. And so they can help foster the kinds of communications and engagement that are critical to climate action at the local level. By definition, the health sector plays a key role in adaptation to environmental risks and in emergency management. It's also itself a significant source of emissions. Health systems alone would be considered the 5th largest emitter if viewed as a country. And lastly, our experience with integrated action on large-scale health challenges can provide a useful model for integrated action in some climate contexts. Next slide, please. So beyond shifting the focus toward health, the other main way that COVID opens the door to climate action has been by providing a concrete focus and opportunity for change in the massive economic response packages. The COVID stimulus has been and continues to be unprecedented in scale and scope. Calls for a green and just recovery have been widespread, though you'd have to say that they've had a limited effect, unfortunately. The net contribution of pandemic stimulus has been negative for environments, but some regions like Canada and much of Europe have had success in orienting their stimulus toward green action, and they provide useful models for the future. Next slide, please. Now, regardless of what happens, COVID and the global climate effort will continue to coexist going forward. With less than half of the world fully vaccinated at this point, the pandemic is not nearly over, and we'll continue to see novel change in the years to come. Of course, we can't know the future, but COVID is likely to be a defining pressure on global policy and practice for climate and for everything else over much of the next decade. It's widely recognized, and we've talked about this before today, that this is the decade when we need to radically cut global emissions to have a chance of remaining below 1.5 degrees or even 2 degrees rise in global average temperatures. But it's also becoming clear that adaptation to global environmental change is just as urgent a need, given risks that are accelerating faster than expected. So it behooves us to think about how COVID will affect these goals on a macro scale, but also on a micro scale. Next slide, please. So now moving from the global to the urban scale, we know that cities are where the climate battle will be won or lost. Cities are where most human beings live. The figure here is 55%. That's the generally accepted figure, but some new measures to standardize urban definitions suggest that as many as 75% of all people live in towns and cities. Cities are responsible for 3/4 of greenhouse gas emissions and resource use globally, which makes them the dominant driver of global environmental change. Most are already dealing with the effects of environmental change, and virtually all are at risk, as we've heard again in the previous presentation. Because most people live in cities, they're also one of the predominant determinants of health. Reconnecting urban design, planning, and management to health is a major ongoing effort that a lot of commentators have drawn attention to over the past decades. Your experience of any health challenge, my experience, whether it's COVID or climate related, has a lot to do with your city's institutions, capacities, and resources, with the level of social capital that underpins trust in its decision making, with its geography and technology and geopolitical situation. Next slide. But cities are exceptionally well positioned to act on climate and health. Cities continually create and renew themselves through processes of innovation and dynamic political, social, economic, and cultural change. And this makes them adaptable in ways that national or global structures can't match. They combine reasonably robust resources, obviously varying from case to case, with a high level of local knowledge in a more balanced way than at any other scale of decision making. They're also generally the scale at which people experience environmental impacts and the level at which they're usually dealt with. And there are thousands and thousands of cities, which means that they form a large collective sample for experimental approaches and for peer learning. Next slide. And of course, cities are acting along with the global thought and practice community dedicated to urban issues. Just to give a few examples, and there are hundreds of examples that I could give here. In the past few years, CDP, which is the main carbon emissions reporting framework for businesses, cities, and finance, has begun adding health questions to the emissions and climate action questionnaire it implements with hundreds of cities every year. So that will be an important new source of data for looking at these sorts of impacts. CDP is also working with the WHO to create a model set of city climate and health profiles. C40 Cities, which represents many of the world's largest and most influential urban areas, has expanded its research and advocacy on climate and health, for example, including on the urban health impacts of coal-generated power. Coal-powered electricity generation. Hundreds of cities around the world have made net zero commitments or declared climate emergencies, and many, not all, of these mention health. But there's much more to be done to deepen those considerations and to make it more integral. Next slide, please. And again, drawing on the link to COVID, thousands of cities are now considering how the changes they've made to cope with the pandemic might be refreshed and repurposed, both for climate action, but also just for healthier living, and those are connected. One visible example of this is temporary bike lanes that are being made permanent in cities around the world, but these kinds of changes stretch across wide swaths of urban life, from transport design to working arrangements to zoning, to urban planning to cultural practice. Next slide. So what can the urban research community do to leverage the moment, this moment when health is prominent, and increase the uptake of knowledge into action for climate and health? I'd emphasize 4 takeaway points. First, find the health messaging. Virtually every climate action has health implications, and that information, that message has never been more powerful than it is right now. Ideally, every presentation on a climate issue would have some link to health. Second, measure health endpoints, including costs and benefits. Include them among key performance indicators. Far too often, urban projects don't measure health at baseline or after implementation, and we lose an important lever for action. Third, find health allies. Actively reach out across disciplines to involve health researchers, professionals, and decision makers in transdisciplinary research projects and science advisory and advocacy efforts. The OECD, here on the right, produced a useful report on addressing societal challenges using transdisciplinary research, and that has recommendations for funders, universities, and international organizations. And lastly, look for opportunities to build health into urban scale climate action. UN Habitat and WHO recently produced a source book for integrating health in urban and territorial planning, which reviews a whole range of existing tools in this domain and makes recommendations. So that's a useful resource. And my hope is that if we're able to do these things effectively, the difficulties of the past few years will have a silver lining, and that health, especially urban health, can become the fulcrum on which we're able to leverage breakthrough climate action. So that's all. Thanks.
So much, Jose. That was a wonderful presentation and has so many practical applications. Really easy to apply in different contexts and can have such a big impact. So thank you so much for that. I'm looking at Professor Huang. Is everything okay now with the? I think we're good.
Yeah, it's okay.
Before going into the discussion, I'd like to invite Professor Lee for our presentation. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Injie Li from Taiwan National Zhongxin University. The title of my presentation today is Urbanization and Global Environmental Change Research and Policy in Taiwan. The content of this presentation is based on the discussion with Professor Chongzhen Li and Professor Shuli Huang. On behalf of Professor Li and Professor Huang, I will make the presentation, and if necessary, they will join the discussion after my presentation. The outline of my presentation includes, first, I will provide the background of urbanization and climate change issues in Taiwan. Then, relate these issues with the previous research on urbanization and global environmental change. And finally, I will discuss the priority for urban research to navigate global environmental change. Taiwan is an island with an area of 36,000 square kilometers, which is about 0.4% of the area of Australia. Due to the mountainous environment, around 90% of population live in the western coastal plain. The population density of Taiwan is about 650 people per square kilometers. As you can see from the slide, the population density is much higher than most of the other countries. The boundaries of major cities in Taiwan were expanded and merged with the surrounding counties around the past decades. Currently, the percentage of urban population is close to 80% in Taiwan. All major cities grew during this period. Now, let me describe some of the features of cities in Taiwan. Due to the geographic setting, almost every city in Taiwan is surrounded by mountains, with rivers and streams passing through. As you can see from the map and pictures, Taipei is located in a floodplain, surrounded by mountains. Kaohsiung in southern Taiwan is a harbor city. Most major cities in Taiwan are located in low-lying flood-prone areas. This is Taipei City. It has been flooded several times during the past decades. There are levees along the major rivers to protect Taipei City from a 200-year flood. This engineering solution has come at the expense of accessibility and visual aesthetics along the urban waterfront. As for urban transit and greenhouse gas emissions, because Taipei has a very good public transit system, the number of people using automobiles and motorcycles to commute is less than 50%. The percentage of those biking has also increased. However, in the other cities like Taichung City and Kaohsiung City, automobiles and motorcycles are still the major mode of transportation. Since the initiation and funding support from central government in 2011, all local governments in Taiwan have completed their local climate change adaptation plans. These local adaptation plans are currently being used to revise their spatial plans. However, current local response to climate change issues are mostly focused on climate change adaptation, and they are still too reactive and not enough actions and plans at the city level. Now I will talk about the previous research on global environmental change in Taiwan. Because of the location of cities and their potential risk to flood, most of the previous research on climate change adaptation are focused on flood vulnerability. We also have several integrated projects funded by Ministry of Science and Technology. Due to the limit of time, I will only introduce one of the projects by Academia Sinica. This slide shows the simulation of flood risk map by Water Resource Agency from the year of 2000. The depth of flooding is simulated under the scenarios of 200 millimeters, 350 millimeters, and 650 millimeters rainfall in 24 hours. This map is applied in flood risk management plans and also help to make emergency operational decisions. And this is an overview of previous study on vulnerability assessment research in Taiwan. I will not go into details due to the limit of time. Because of the potential risk of the cities is flood, most studies are focused on coastal areas. And many studies established frameworks or indicators for vulnerability assessment, and they provide suggestions for adaptation strategies and spatial policies. There are also many studies mapping flood vulnerability. This is one of the examples combining adaptive capacity and potential impact, and show that the most vulnerable areas to flood are in peri-urban areas. Following the previous slide on vulnerability assessment, another study shows that urban vulnerability to flooding is an interactive and dynamic process in conjunction with urban development. An integrated spatial system model was built to simulate the dynamic interaction between flood vulnerability and land use and land cover change. The result shows the spatial distribution of change of vulnerability due to urbanization. During the period of 2012 to 2015, a research team led by Professor Michael Shaw conducted an integrated research project entitled Urban Response to Global Climate Change, supported by Academia Sinica. This project pays special attention to human dimension issues of climate change, and the major purpose is to provide a better understanding about the drivers which affect urban areas' greenhouse gas emissions and the factors related to strategies of urban mitigation and adaptation. And the findings are very crucial to improve the capacity of urban societies in response to climate change. This integrated project promotes multidisciplinary collaboration and consists of 6 sub-projects: risk of urban development around coastal areas of Taiwan, urban industry and economy transformation in response to climate change, investigating the effects of urbanization and urban form on energy consumption and greenhouse gas emission, urban social problems and coping strategies to climate change, spatial planning and climate change mitigation and adaptation, and urban climate governance in Taiwan. This project has come to produce fruitful outputs. In addition to several international journal papers, there is a book published by National Taiwan University Press and a special issue of Taiwanese Planning Journal to deliver the outcomes. In addition, the project team has also contributed to policy formation by co-design with the policymakers. And this presentation summarizes several key conclusions and policy recommendations as follows. First, regarding urban land use, the mitigation and adaptation strategies in response to climate change should be incorporated into urban planning and related regulations. At present, climate policies at city level focus mainly on adaptation aspect, while mitigation policies are mostly planned at national level. Given the fact that urban emission accounts for 17% of global emissions, it is essential to highlight the roles of cities in climate change mitigation. This study estimates CO2 emissions of Taipei City and Kaohsiung City by downscale national data and compared with land use plan. And this study also suggests that the linkage between mitigation policies at national level and city levels should be evaluated and coordinated. Second, There is a great difference on energy consumption and CO2 emissions in different regions in Taiwan because of the different urban industrial development in different regions. The design of national top-down mitigation policies should also consider the economic impact at different spatial levels, especially the spatial extreme impacts on the regional economy in southern Taiwan. The third is related to social vulnerability and urban resilience of cities in Taiwan. Cities and communities in Taiwan are facing a variety of climate challenges, such as flooding, heat, and sea level rise in coastal cities. In response, cities should pay more attention to the development of urban resilience indicators. In addition, it's further to identify the groups or communities vulnerable to different climate impacts. And the social welfare program should include plans to help vulnerable groups and communities. Last, from the perspective of urban governance and institution, national governments should encourage university and research institutions' involvement to improve local governments' capacity on climate governance. This study also suggests that climate change related environmental change and social development should be monitored and included in the statistics related to urban and regional development. And the information will facilitate the design of sound policy. After reviewing the previous research and study on urbanization and global environmental change, we strongly feel that instead of merely minimizing climate impact, cities should proactively navigate global environmental change issues. For example, what are the roles cities should lead in response to global environmental change from bottom-up perspective? Or how can urbanization be harmonized with the other distant areas by minimizing teleconnected effects on other cities or rural areas? In January, Urban Working Group of Future Earth Taipei held a workshop in Academia Sinica to discuss the future research priorities corresponding to the themes of research priorities proposed by Urban Can. I will summarize the proposed research priority on navigate global environmental change from the meeting in January. In order to achieve greenhouse gas reduction targets of 2030 and 2050, Taiwan government has implemented Greenhouse Gas Reduction and Management Act since 2015, and also promoted Greenhouse Gas Reduction Action Plan at the national level. The question is, how have local governments performed to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions? And are there synergy or trade-offs between national and local government policy to mitigate climate change? There are still several local policies to reduce carbon emissions, such as bike sharing or recycling. We should evaluate the effectiveness of these local policies in reducing greenhouse gas emissions and whether there are co-benefits from these policies. And the integration of spatial planning, infrastructure development, and urban governance in a more efficient way to mitigate climate change is also a pressing issue for local government. Nature-based solutions are already being recognized as effective measures to cope with climate change issue in urban areas. Since there are already great infrastructure existed in most of the cities, how can nature-based solutions be promoted and the existing green infrastructure can be more further synergistically integrated with green infrastructure? What are the current performance using nature-based solutions to cope with climate change issue in Taiwan? And how should we deal with the difficulties and constraints of promoting nature-based solutions in Taiwan? The cities in Taiwan highly rely on flood control facilities, such as a levee, a pumping station, to protect the cities from flooding. How should we evaluate the underestimate of risk awareness and the increase of social risk due to the over-reliance on flood control facilities? conventional practice of spatial planning focused on zoning and land use control, and did not include the mechanism to respond to sudden change from external systems. So, how can planning paradigm be shifted in response to global climate change and pandemic? In addition, instead of simply protect the variable ecological landscape, their ecosystem services can be included in the urban planning and governance. So this is the end of my presentation. Thanks very much for your attention.
Very happy to learn about the case studies that you were sharing, and of course also many linkages with the two previous presentations in terms of talking about risk and implications on the inhabitants of cities. So we're next up for a discussion time. So I would like to welcome everybody to either bring up any questions or discussion points in the chat, but you can also raise your hands and then we can identify you to make your question or discussion point live. But I'd like to maybe also invite everybody to think deeply about what are the implications basically of the science that's already been shared in the presentations today, and what is really still lacking. There was a lot of talk about, you know, policies and government, local government, what kind of actions they have to take, but what is still lacking. Like, for example, Professor Lee talked about a heavy dependency on built infrastructure based on perhaps zoning techniques that are no longer relevant for the current external pressures, especially environmental pressures that are happening. So what are solutions that are being discussed at the moment, and how can policymakers make rapid changes in their infrastructure to avoid damages and impacts on health? Like, maybe everybody can think briefly about that, and I'd like to invite the speakers of the last three presentations to maybe give their initial thoughts on that in the meantime. Professor Shear, would you like to start?
Yes, of course. So on this question of what is missing, I would like to emphasize the missing element is integration and the connection of also knowledge and action as the name of our network. But in this aspect of integration, for example, even if we're saying we're going to focus on urban planning, spatial planning to reduce adding new buildings to areas prone to flooding, low-lying areas, or next to riverbeds, or coastal development. Even this type of mentality is important to further integrate this. So already integrating urban planning with maybe this climate adaptation, climate mitigation, but further adapting and further integrating the urban planning with energy planning. This is also missing. So for example, if you have a walkable and compact area, how it could be linked to maybe district cooling networks for especially tropical areas, or district heating networks for other types of climate. So even if we're thinking, I'm planning a city, limiting the proneness and vulnerability to different types of climate risks, how that could be integrated with other aspects. Then also social practices, so how I can increase the well-being of the people, how I can multiply the co-benefits for health, for example. Even if we're trying to connect things, it's still not at that level of integration that's necessary. So this would be my contribution and perspective.
So much so, yeah. We talked about the multifunctionality of any kind of solution that's being brought into cities. So thank you very much. Professor Lee, would you like to give your thoughts on that? You're muted. So really, what is missing in terms of the science not yet being fully implemented, and what can policymakers basically still adapt for rapid change?
Well, maybe I can answer this question for Professor Lee, because I basically get involved with the urban planning issues in Taiwan. And actually, urban planning or the flood management or even the environmental protection are all done by different departments. And the problem is that although we have many research or research reports, publication talk about how planning and climate mitigation and adaptation should be integrated. But the problem is that all the urban planning in Taiwan especially is done according to the laws. So if the urban planning laws, the urban planning process is not revised by the laws, then the practitioners, they will be very difficult to integrate all the different elements into the urban planning. And what they can do is still finish all the plans, revise all the plans according to the zoning regulations. Although, so this is what happening in Taiwan now. Although there are many very good policies about the mitigation or the low carbon cities, but the problem is that there are still many development happening because the urban planning law has not been revised, and the climate issue is not integrated into the urban planning laws, that the practitioners simply cannot take into those considerations to revise the plan. I think that's our key issues here. And it takes time to revise the urban planning related laws and regulations.
Yeah, that's a very interesting insight, and I'm sure that comes from your vast experience on dealing with laws and regulations in design practice as well. And I see increasingly around the world how the private sector is definitely playing a new important role in developing new innovative small districts that are somehow able to work away from what the general public law is in terms of planning. So I see there's potentially some interesting case studies around that as well. Moving to Jose, what are your reflections on that question?
Yeah, so I'm going to give you a very original answer, and I'm going to say the key is integration. But I think that integration is what drives the systems approach. It's what enables it. But there are different flavors of integration. So integration across sectors is one of the things that's come up a lot, but also integration across actors, improving common decision-making power, integration of decision-making in single focus points so that you can do more. And I think it's important to remember that integration is important, but silos and specialization has value. That's why we do it. It allows people to act. So we have to find out which parts of integration, which mechanisms, which opportunities are the most valuable. And I think a lot of what Professor Bai presented earlier gets at some of that. What are the key aspects of it? What are the systemic structures that function? I would say two other things. One is participation is another thing that's absolutely key to moving forward, especially participation of communities in designing solutions. Because without that, you don't get the right solutions, you don't get uptake, you don't get to where you need to get to. And the third is just vision. What is the world that we're working towards? Because it's going to be a radically different world than we're living in if it's going to be something that functions. A world that's post GDP growth, a world that's post maybe capitalism in some sense, although that might be controversial, but it's a different world that we're moving towards, and we need to have that in mind as we're working through these issues.
I've been struggling for a few years now around the question of participation, particularly if you're talking about involving key actors, stakeholders in your projects. It's so complex when you're dealing with urban issues because there's so many different stakeholders and actors. And from your experiences, how do you make sure that you can take up all these different voices in the decision-making process? What is the answer there?
I don't think there's one answer. I mean, that answer is going to depend in every city that you work in every context that you work in. I think that you're also never going to get perfection. That's not the way it works. You're never going to include everybody who's relevant. But you have to start by trying to ensure that the broad segments of society are represented. So especially those who are traditionally underrepresented in whatever context you're in. So that's the one thing you have to do. But then, as you say, and as others have mentioned, you have to include business and industry generally to get good solutions. You have to include the public sector, obviously. It's good to involve academia in many contexts because they have knowledge that's specialized and that's useful for these kinds of things. So I think if you're covering the broad set of domains, then that's a starting point, right? And it's a bit of trial and error from there.
Siri, I noticed you're putting some questions in the chat. Would you like to talk about them directly?
For my two co-presenters, I have one question. I appreciate all of the presentations very much. One is relating to telecoupling. You mentioned how the urbanization can reduce the telecoupling. Do you have any suggestions for what type of indicators could be evaluated and monitored in the context of the Taiwanese experience? That is my question. And then also for Mr. Jose Siri, I would like to ask the perception of climate risk and what can be learned. If we had perceived, for example, the pandemic risk better, how would the preparedness been different? And is there some lessons to be learned for how the cities and urban areas can be more prepared by having a better understanding of climate risk?
Yes, thank you. In Taiwan, we had a research project, integrated research project about related to urban teleconnection, but it's only academic research, and we have not integrated that into our laws or regulations. So now we have no indicators related to teleconnected perspective. Yeah, so.
Maybe to follow up on that, Professor Lee, what are sort of like the indicators that you've been looking at, particularly in that project? Or if Professor Huang is familiar with the project.
Okay. Because the project is basically from academic point of view, so the kind of research or indicator we use is something like how the city rely on the food or the building construction material from teleconnected area, and whether the exploitation of the building construction material has affected the environmental impact of the teleconnected area. So we really feel that all those negative impacts from the city to the teleconnected area should be included in the evaluation of the urban sustainability of the city. But the fact is that right now we only limit all the evaluation inside the city and did not include the negative effect on the teleconnected area. So it is still on the academic research, and it is very difficult to convince the policymakers to include this type of teleconnected effect into the city. We are trying to do that.
I hope, sir, that answers your question too. Great.
Very much, yes.
And then the question for Jose.
Yeah, thank you. There's a number of interesting questions there, so I'm going to try and take a gestalt of it, right? One of the things to point out is that we thought we appreciated the risks of the pandemic beforehand. There's famously a ranking of countries by how prepared they were for pandemic influenza, and it's just utterly wrong. You know, many of the countries that were high up on that list are completely failing in the pandemic. And it just shows that complex systems can throw up unexpected challenges and unexpected results. And so in some sense, in this context, you have to apply the precautionary principle. Some of the countries that that some might say overreacted in the initial stages of the pandemic are those that have done by far the best. That includes countries like Taiwan have done very well compared to others. One thing that I mean, in terms of the risks, if you think that the reaction to the pandemic has been appropriate in some sense in terms of our reaction to it, then why are we not reacting that way to climate when it causes similar things? So understanding what it is about those risks that's different in terms of our comprehension is a really important thing. I think that for climate, one of the things that we have done is just failed to communicate, to understand, but also to communicate how important it is for health. And I think that if we did that more effectively, we'd be in a much better position to act on climate.
So in terms of health, do you think, I mean, I understand that the policy focus has changed a little bit more to the protection of particularly human health. Do you see that reflected in some of the other much needed changes in terms of climate mitigation and adaptation? Is that happening already, or are we still too early in the game to start talking about this?
I think it's happening. I think it's, I don't want to give the impression that it only happened now. People have been thinking about this for quite some time. But I think that it's picked up a momentum this year that I haven't seen before. And a lot of the things that we have been arguing about or you know, putting forward for the past several decades now are sort of taken as a given. You know, complexity is, systems approach is now taken as a given, although no one can explain what it is. But these things are gaining momentum, and certainly the activity at COP was really a signal event for that inclusion of health. So to me, it's really promising.
So I am not seeing that many questions coming in through the chat. So is there anybody that would like to simply speak up? Because I don't want to dominate the conversation with questions, and I think it's great to have some participation from the audience. I'm also always happy to hear reflections from, for example, the speakers from the earlier session, including Professor Bai or others. Of course, if Professor Huang has some additional comments based on his experiences working both on the Future Taipei Working Group on Urban Issues, as well as the Urban Knowledge Action Network, and how those activities can be linked going forward, we're very much welcoming that as well.
Well, maybe I would like to raise one more thing. Is that the title of this panel, Navigate Global Environmental Change. I think navigate, the term is very important. And I think the reason why the urban can use the term navigate global environmental change is that because the city, many of the policies may be from the top down. And I think the city should really try to proactively lead how to reduce or to minimize the climate impacts. And this is really what we need to enhance in Taiwan here. But I don't know how about the experience from the other countries, such as from Australia or from Japan, whether they feel that the city really has the capability to lead the kind of action or action plans which can really mitigate climate change issues. That's something I really like to know, and whether the other people has any other suggestion or opinion.
Is there somebody from the panel that would like to start with addressing that question? Sure, please go ahead.
Excellent perspective. Yes, the word navigate has a very, very important role, and it's important for the cities to be proactive and lead this part, because there are multiple reasons for this. We're talking about the missing link being integration. Because of the concentration of people, the integration needs to take place in the cities. Then that integration can lead further effective action, leading the countries, diffusing something that's learned in one city to the other city. So diffusing the policy learning and diffusing the urban experimentation, upscaling. So this is also the reason that our research priority is also linked and to the other research priorities. In Turkey, we recently adopted also a net zero target. We have a plan for smart cities with the vision of sustainable and livable cities. But of course, as similar regions, we also need more connection between knowledge and action, because sometimes the action is there, but how do we transform this knowledge into action at the local level to get them to this point of integration, to get them to the level of upscaling? And also, everything is changing. So even our understanding of climate science is improving. Our understanding of how, for example, also the modeling at the local level, this is improving. But trying to use this knowledge and transforming it to action is very key to how cities will be able to navigate proactively the environmental change while reducing their impacts, including teleconnected impacts.
Just on navigating, I touched on this in my talk, but I think that cities are sort of uniquely positioned to navigate, to be the pilots in this process, because they are more adaptable than the national governments. They can move more quickly and shift course, and they have more knowledge of what's happening on the ground. And so I think it's critical, and you do see that. You see that cities are out ahead in terms of ambition on net zero pledges. You see them declaring climate emergencies at a level that countries aren't doing. But it would be good to see more recognition of that role of cities in financing. So more financing provided to cities to be able to take that kind of experimental approach that we need in navigating.
Actually, the question also reminded me of our collaboration with the Covenant of Mayors and UN Habitat just recently, as Professor Bai also mentioned already, on the Innovate for Cities conference. There was a very strong focus in the conference on the practitioners' activities related to climate change adaptation and mitigation. So there's a lot of really valuable insights in many sessions. That is, by the way, all freely available. There's no registration fee. Everything's available even for watching retrospectively. It's from various cities, but also potential opportunities for collaborations going forward. Professor Lee, do you have some insights there on how navigation, or particularly the context of navigating global environmental change, how you see that in the context of okay.
The priorities of navigate global environment change. The presentation is based on our discussion in Academia Sinica, and in Taipei we think the status of cities, Taipei cities, is very important because it's between local and local level, and it has some function or possible or chance to have new or innovative policies or measures to make cities have more efficient way to mitigate or adaptation like that.
Thank you. So these are very interesting discussions, and I note that Dr. Searching Joe also made some reflections in the chat, particularly in terms of missing research gaps and how there's already some indication, but still lots of challenges in making solutions a reality. Talking about both state-led and market-driven forces that seem to be dominant, but also the bottom-up experiences and research activities on that can be scaled up to various levels. Might have some opportunities for global environmental change. So thank you so much, and I appreciate that input. So we're slightly early, but I think we've had a good discussion, and there's many different directions in the discussion that we can take. But if everybody is comfortable at this point, I'd like to close the session and hand over. And of course, thank you to the three presenters. I'd like to close this session and hand over to the next, not presenter, but the next session that we'll talk about, where we're going to be closing the workshop, basically. So if everything's comfortable and nobody has any additional questions, I'd like to hand over back to Professor Shumei Bai, the co-chair of the Urban Knowledge Action Network. Professor Bai, are you there?
Yep, I'm trying to come back with my video. Thank you so much, Jill, and thank you for the wonderful presentations to the panels. So I guess we have come to the closing of this forum. So I'm really glad that we made this happen, and I really learned a lot about the long history of engagement with this global research and very exciting ongoing research that are happening under this Future Taipei umbrella. And I could see many potential points for future collaborations. And there are several elements I sort of picked up. It's by no means to be comprehensive, but I can see there are quite strong focus on understanding the risks, environmental or health or otherwise, and also strong interest in terms of transition, for example, the net zero carbon cities, and how it is perceived by the general public and researchers and things like that, or very interesting research. And I can also see there are quite strong focus on interconnectedness among different elements and processes. I think it has been emphasized by several different presentations today, and also the importance of integrative systems approach. And I could also see quite strong interest on innovation, like urban sustainability experiment, or be it urban living lab, or sandpit policy approach. They all have different names, but I think the essence is the same. Really try to understand, encourage and understand the innovation that are happening within urban space. And also, there's quite interesting and important willingness that is expressed about conducting comparative analysis to compare the Taiwan's study and case with broader, like Southeast Asia or Asian or beyond sort of context. And I think it is really important, and it is also one of the sort of focus for Urban Can as a network that can actually hope to facilitate and help conduct this sort of comparative analysis. And these are all really a very important point, and a point of further discussion and engagement between Taipei Futures Committee and the Urban Can. So from me, I would really like to thank our co-organizer, the Taipei Futures Committee. I mean, I'm saying co-organized, but actually most of the work are done by the committee, and it's urban working group. And I really look forward to further engaging with Taipei Urban Futures Committee and the Urban Working Group in collaborative research, together, publishing together, or us applying for funding together. And also thank you so much to all the presenters and participants today, and I really look forward for further collaboration. So I'd like to hand over to probably Professor Huang to say the last words.
Okay, thank you, Professor Bai. And I think this is really a very great opportunity to have Urban Can to co-organize this meeting. And also, Professor Bai actually is here in this online forum. So I was trying to suggest that all the participants, if you like to know more about Urban Can, or if you have any suggestion, I think this should be the right time to do it. And also, I'd like to mention one thing is that one of the purpose for this online forum is to warm up the other bigger events. That's our original idea, is that because of the COVID-19, it is very difficult to have many people to travel, international travel. I think it's very difficult right now. But we expect that these another bigger events might be possible in the near future. So we are using this online forum. It's only a small activity. Try to warm up that maybe people will be more interested and to bring up more issues on the cities and climate change or urban sustainability. Try to share the experience or try to collaborate in the future. So this is one of our purpose to hold this online forum. So before we close this forum, I would like to see, are there any questions or any suggestions from the participants to the Urban Can or to Future Earth Taipei Urban Working Group? Are there any suggestions from the participants? Seems like our participants are very quiet. If not, oh, okay, Michael.
I appreciate the all the presentations. I think it's a good combination of the global perspective, on the global scene, and also the local case studies. And I think we heard about the New Taipei City's case. We heard about the detailed description on the paper presented by Professor Li on we did urban responses to climate change on Taipei, Kaohsiung, and also the suggestions how the local government can do to deal with the climate change. Usually sometimes we see the two kind of a research. Actually, they don't talk to each other. One is global, talk about the temperature, the climate change, and also 1.5 degrees thing, and what we should do globally. And the other thing is the local. So how can we link these two things together? Or should we not to link together, but the link in between? We need a state. We need a national society to bring in instead of a city and then global. We think the central government, the local government, and also the research base, solid base on urban settings. And if we can collect, I suggest, if we can collect in the future more case studies, and if we can focus on Asia Pacific, that will be a good start. If we cannot, of course, we can broaden. We can include Australia, New Zealand, or other good cases. Then we can find out, if we can find out the best practice cases, that would be great. And to see how the city government, the citizen groups can really make a change to deal with the climate change. I think the city study, national study, and then global study, then we can link them. Then all require solid research and knowledge generation. So I think this is a good start. So as Professor Huang said, that we are thinking about to planning a bigger event when the situation allows. So maybe in between now and then we can plan on it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. And are there any suggestions? So Michael just said that we are planning another bigger event. So if there's any suggestion or about this event, maybe you can either send us email or whatever. So we can still continue to collaborate with Urban Can for another bigger events if it's possible. Okay. If there's no further question, so maybe we should close this forum by now, as it's already more than 4 hours.
Very, very quickly, Professor Wang, I also would like to thank Mr. Atma Tree for his help in co-organizing.
Yes, yes.
So thank you.
Yes, Ying-Xian.
Okay. Thank you very
Okay.
much. I hope to see you soon.
Okay,
Hey,
thank you.
Thank
you.
you all
Thanks so
very
much.
much.
Good
Thank you.
evening.